Hello, everyone. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I'll be giving you some introductory remarks. I know what you're really waiting for is our speakers, and we have quite a lineup today. I'd like to welcome you this afternoon. I'm Frankie Clogston. I'm the Vice President of Knowledge Management and Development here at IEDC, the International Economic Development Council. And today we're bringing you the first of 3 geographically targeted economic recovery briefings for communities affected by Hurricane Ida. Hurricane Ida made landfall in the U.S. almost a month ago, resulting in 95 deaths in the U.S. and costing an estimated $95 billion in damage. Today's session is targeted to the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic region, where the storm triggered flash floods and tornadoes, resulting in 40 deaths. In this forum, senior leadership from the Economic Development Administration, or EDA, and other federal entities will join regional disaster recovery specialists to discuss the resources available to jumpstart the recovery process. So we have 3 sessions, which are an hour to an hour and a half, and feel free to attend any of them or to come in and out. Let me give you an overview of what you will be hearing. In the first hour and a half, we'll be looking at a path to recovery for Hurricane Ida in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic and giving you an overview. And we've got some great speakers. I'll be discussing them in just one moment. Following that, around 2:30, we will have federal recovery resources representatives from the EDA region, as well as SPA. And after that, we will have some community recovery and resilience case studies from prior hurricanes that have hit the Northeast. So during the event, if you have questions for our panelists, I'd ask you to please put them during the chat box as they occur to you, certainly. And there will be a period for questions and answers at the end of each of the 3 sessions. We also have some questions prepared to facilitate discussion. We do have a fabulous list of speakers with us. And in the first section, we're going to kick it off with Patrick Toohey, the Federal Disaster Recovery Officer for Region 2 for FEMA. And then Michelle Chang, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy at EDA, and Mickey Valente of Valente Strategic Advisors, along with Jeff Finkel, the President and CEO of IEDC, who will be joining us in the first panel. In later sections, we'll hear from representatives, as I said, from the EDA and SPA. And then finally, we'll hear about some case studies from Vermont and New York from Hurricane Sandy. So let's go ahead and get started. And our first guest is Patrick Toohey. He's the Federal Disaster Recovery Officer for Region 2 with FEMA. Patrick has served as the Federal Disaster Recovery Officer for FEMA Region 2 since Hurricane Sandy. And in this capacity, he helps state, local, tribal, and territorial partners achieve their recovery vision across communities. Toohey has supported Hurricane Sandy recovery efforts in New York and New Jersey, and he helped establish the joint recovery offices in the USVI in Puerto Rico after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, and he's currently supporting the Hurricane Ida recovery. So I'd like to turn it over to Patrick Toohey.
Yeah, Frankie, thank you very much. Audio good? First, I'd like to thank you all for inviting me and also just send the regrets of my regional administrator, Chad Gorman. FEMA Region 2, which you'll see in a moment, covers the New York, New Jersey, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. And due to the Hurricane Sam that is currently active in the Caribbean area, he's currently in the planning efforts for that event. But really just wanted to thank you for extending the invite to me today. During my comments, one thing I just want to highlight to the group is that it is not just one agency, FEMA, that helps a community both prepare for, respond to, and recover from a disaster. It truly takes a whole community approach. And since Hurricane Sandy, we've partnered with our regional federal partners, our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners to ensure that we're all working together to recover from all hazards here in Region 2, most recently, Hurricane Ida, but we've had the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had Hurricanes Irma, Maria. So, we all have to ensure that we're prepared to respond and recover from any hazards. So I'd just like to quickly, pull up a slide deck, which will give you an overview of FEMA Region 2, the current status of our efforts in recovering from Hurricane Ida, and kind of hopefully give a preview of some resilience efforts that we have going forward. So bear with me while I share my screen. Okay, hopefully that is coming through well enough for everyone. So just as I mentioned, FEMA Region 2, you'll see here covers New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and the 7 federally recognized tribes in New York State. As noted, as Frankie noted, on September 1st, in the overnight hours, September 1st, record rainfall impacted both New York State as well as New Jersey. This record rainfall caused catastrophic flooding throughout the Ida-affected areas. The impacts in New York City, specifically urban stormwater issues. 4 inches of rain in 1 hour. With hydrology, those 4 inches can quickly turn into 7 feet of water once it flows down into a basement apartment, for example. And what we saw was the tragic outcome of that. Our stormwater sewers overflowing into people's apartments. So it quickly became apparent that the impacts from Ida in both New York and in New Jersey, which saw record riverine impacts across northern central New Jersey, as well as tornadoes in the southwest of the state. It's just a quick note on the disaster declaration process. So September 1st was the impacts of the result of the disaster. And a few days later, in New York, Governor Hochul, and in New Jersey, Governor Murphy made a request to the president for a major disaster declaration. So across both of our states, FEMA works with our state counterparts and local counterparts to do preliminary damage assessments. So basically, we go and survey the impacted areas to see if the damage exceeds the capabilities of our state partners. All of this is outlined in the process in the Stafford Act. So shortly thereafter, on September 6th, the president declared a major disaster declaration in both states. So in New Jersey, that is DR 4614, and in New York, DR 4615. Briefly, you'll see that preliminary damage assessment process and the major disaster declaration process is based upon counties. So briefly here, you will see the designated counties for DR 4614 in New Jersey. Those red checkerboard areas are where both our individual assistance and public assistance programs have been turned on. So that joint preliminary damage assessment process each county is reviewed for their damages. And if they meet a certain threshold, the recommendation is made to the president to designate those counties for these programs. For DR 4615 in New York State, you'll see in red those counties that are eligible or designated for both individual assistance and FEMA public assistance. So you have Long Island and the 5 boroughs of New York City. Quickly, those you'll note it's tough to see on this map, but New York County, Manhattan, you'll see is in orange, and that means that it did not. It's not a designated county for individual assistance, only for public assistance. And I'll briefly discuss in subsequent slides, what those 2 programs can do and the process involved in applying for assistance. Before I get into those specific programs, though, just want to give you a sense of what FEMA has been doing since these disasters have been declared in both New York and New Jersey. So once a county is declared for individual assistance, FEMA will work with our state and local partners to identify a disaster recovery center. These centers are a joint effort with our state partners, and they have resources from both New York State, New York City, the Red Cross, and importantly to note here, our partners from the Small Business Administration. So really they serve as a one-stop shop, so to speak, where survivors can go and physically be in person to apply for assistance, to have to identify any unmet needs that they may have, so that we can refer them to some partner agencies if they're not eligible for FEMA assistance, as an example. And they can also apply for other programs, for instance, the Small Business Administration. In addition to setting up these disaster recovery centers, FEMA also activates and deploys our disaster survivor assistance cadre. So basically, since the disaster has been declared, we have personnel who are canvassing heavily impacted areas to ensure that survivors of this event know how to apply for FEMA assistance. They have iPads with them frequently where they can register survivors on site for FEMA assistance, and that we identify trends that we are seeing in the community. Okay, so I mentioned our programs, individual assistance and public assistance, that have been activated in this disaster. So just want to give you a quick overview of each of those programs, and happy to take any questions you all may have about that. And also briefly share and give you a snapshot of currently where we are at with each of these programs. Okay, the Individual Assistance Program and Individual and Households Program is designed to cover uninsured or underinsured individuals who may have been impacted by Hurricane Ida. For homeowners, if they have uninsured repairs, home repairs, they can receive assistance for eligible damages. For instance, for renters, if they are unable to be in their home because of unsafe conditions, for instance, mold, they can be eligible for rental assistance. Additionally, there are certain criteria where there's other needs assistance for which a survivor can be eligible. For instance, if a survivor was impacted and their home was flooded and they lost their dentures in that flood, there are a certain set number of items covered through which FEMA can support our survivors in their application. In addition to those sort of direct assistance, there are also disaster legal services with pro bono attorneys who can field questions from survivors about what they are eligible for, and to guide them through their recovery process. There's also crisis counseling. Obviously, it's a traumatic event for people who have been impacted by a disaster. So FEMA activates some of these programs to help support survivors. Currently, you'll see here I have a map of in New Jersey, the current kind of hotspots throughout New Jersey. We currently have about 52,000 registrations for individual assistance. And I think the current total is roughly about $35 million that have been awarded to survivors for both their home repair needs as well as their rental assistance. One thing to note, once that survivor applies, it's an inspection process. So, all of those 52,000 applications have not been processed as yet. And I think that 35 million represents just roughly about around 7,000 individual cases that have been awarded. But through this map, you'll see most heavily impacted counties in New Jersey, up in the Northeast, down in the Southwest there in Gloucester. You'll see the impacts from the tornado and the flooding along the Delaware River there. While the impacts and the causes of the flooding were somewhat different here in New York State, in New York City, primarily stormwater runoff. However, in Westchester, we saw a lot of flooding along the Mamaroneck rivers, as well as in Yonkers. So even though these two different, typologies and causes of flood, we are seeing kind of a remarkable similarity both in the numbers of registrations in New York State, as well as the amount of current assistance that we're seeing. So roughly about 50,000 registrations for individual assistance have been, there's roughly 50,000 registrants. We currently have awarded around $35 million and just around that same figure of 7,000 cases that have been awarded individually. As our inspectors go to meet with our survivors and survey and verify the damages to each individual house and apartment, those numbers will continue to grow. Just for scale, on a disaster like Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, we saw almost 420,000 individual registrations for FEMA assistance, with over $1 billion awarded for survivors from that event. So as our inspectors are out in the field, you'll see those numbers of assistance through individual assistance grow. Now, the largest program that FEMA has brought to bear after a disaster is our public assistance program. And sometimes that confuses folks who are unfamiliar with FEMA, but the public assistance program is not for individuals or households. That is the previous program that I just talked about. Public assistance is for publicly owned infrastructure, and to include private not-for-profits who are eligible to receive assistance. This can include roads, bridges, parks, hospitals that are non-for-profits, a whole suite of community resources. It can include power companies, wastewater treatment plants. So really, all of those critical lifelines that are publicly owned that make a community function. And that's why I was so happy to receive the invite today, because as I noted, it takes a whole community to recover from a disaster. And, to note that this is publicly owned infrastructure, but more germane to this audience is that Sorry, I believe we might have a hot mic. But germane to this audience here, if you do not have a functioning power network or a functioning wastewater treatment network, it is tough to have a growing economy and that produces jobs and fosters economic development. Converse at the same time and in parallel, if a community after a disaster starts to lose small businesses and lose their tax base, it becomes harder and harder for those communities to manage and have the financial resources to manage these federal grant programs, as well as to cover the non-federal cost share associated with these large grant programs. So there's really a symbiotic relationship between the programs that FEMA has after a disaster and the larger economic development landscape within the disaster affected community. As the Federal Disaster Recovery Officer, what I work towards is to ensure that we are recovering, that we are not siloing our recovery programs. So for instance, after Hurricane Sandy, there was roughly 19 different federal agencies that received an appropriation from the impacts of Hurricane Sandy. So all these federal agencies were awarding projects in a relatively small geographic area. So we had to ensure that we were leveraging those project scopes to reduce future risk, as well as preventing duplication of program or effort. And our partners at the Economic Development Administration as Small Business Administration are key. As I mentioned, we have to take that whole community approach. FEMA may not have the authorities to drive economic development, but we need to make sure that we are both repairing and mitigating the critical lifeline infrastructure that does drive economic investment and economic development. So I will pause there. I just want to check in, see if there are any questions.
I'll take this out.
If anybody does have any questions for Patrick, it would be fine and appropriate to certainly go ahead and ask them now. I think we're waiting on our next guest.
Great.
There's going to be another opportunity for when we have the panel at large, but I'll wait to see what we have.
And one thing I just wanted to mention, Frankie, is that
yes.
FEMA also does have private sector liaisons.
Yeah.
So our team is working with chambers of chambers of commerce locally to ensure that we're all partnering together in a unity of effort on this disaster recovery operation. So while FEMA does not sometimes have the authorities under the Stafford Act to work with or fund private sector entities, it is an important element of the large recovery landscape. We'll also quickly note that and make a plug for the National Flood Insurance Program. I did note that there's a sequence delivery in individual assistance where if survivors have insurance, that would cover them first. And if there are items that are not covered by their insurance, they can come back and apply for FEMA assistance. But there are caps to that FEMA assistance, and individual and households program is not meant to make you whole how you were before a disaster, and it doesn't cover non-essential items. So if you lost exercise equipment or something like that, that is not something that FEMA is going to cover. So important to note that we encourage folks to look into and get acquiring flood insurance, because that will frequently that assistance will frequently cover much more than FEMA may. And I'd say that process also happens in public assistance. So if an entity is insured for losses, public entity has an insurance policy, that would come first. Whatever is not covered by that, that FEMA public assistance can look at. But really, with the increasing number of disasters and the impacts of climate change, we really do want to make sure that people are covering themselves in insuring themselves to cover their risk. And also as an agency, we're really driving investments in mitigation. Each dollar spent in mitigation, it saves $6. So our goal here on the Ida recovery and subsequent disasters is to not only just build back, but build back stronger. So under our FEMA assistance program, there's something called 406 mitigation, which if you have a damaged facility, you can do things like elevate your critical infrastructure. So after Sandy, we had the New York City Housing Authority, who elevated a lot of their boilers and critical electrical equipment. So now with this new disaster, those assets are protected. We did not see the types of impacts to NYCHA residents that we may have had those mitigation investments not been made. So that's another key element that we want to ensure that we're pushing on this recovery. Thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were surprised to see a hurricane have such a catastrophic effect on a population center like New York City. And I wonder if you can just speak to the specific needs of very dense urban communities and therefore the preparedness and mitigation efforts associated with urban areas.
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, one thing that we're seeing in New York City, for example, where I'm currently deployed, you know, the nature of the flooding heavily impacted basement apartments, for example, with tragic results. You know, that is all happens in a housing market that, you know, there's affordability challenges, et cetera. And, you know, those most heavily impact or likely live in some of these basement apartments are our most vulnerable communities. So, you know, that is one avenue that we want to work on this recovery effort. And not only with Hurricane Ida funding, but also across the various funding landscape to try and come up with mechanisms that we can fund risk reduction measures. You know, look at stormwater improvements to promote green infrastructure improvements. You know, we've in an urban environment with all of the pavement and concrete that certainly puts a toll on those stormwater systems. So to try to promote, you know, a more resilient recovery is something that we're striving for on this disaster recovery, because we've noted that you know, we have to be innovative in our approach to disaster recovery. We can't just go back to how it was, but noting that you know, sea level rise and climate change, we have to, you know, kind of build towards the future. So that stormwater impacts, as well as working with our other federal partners who may have future projects for riverine systems and levees. So we look to partner with our other federal partners and state and local partners to reduce risks so that we're postured for those future hazards.
Okay, great. Well, Patrick, as I said, we're going to ask you to stick around to talk with the panel at large to answer more questions. We thank you very much for that presentation. I now have the pleasure of introducing, well, somebody who I work for, the president and CEO of IEDC, Jeffrey Finkel. And Jeff is here to say a few words and then to introduce our next special guest, Michelle Chang, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy at EDA. So Jeff, it's your turn at the podium, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Frankie, Todd and everyone else who's put this together. This is, as was mentioned at the beginning, one of 3 sessions that we're going to have, and this is kind of the first one out of the gun. As has probably already been said, excuse me, IEDC has been working in a post-economic recovery work since Katrina. And in Katrina, we learned what works and what doesn't work for communities, particularly on economic recovery. We don't know a lot about housing and some of the other issues, but when it comes to getting the economy working again, that's what our members are good at. We're very fortunate today to have Deputy Assistant Secretary Michelle Chang with us. The team over at EDA is as strong as I've seen it in a long time, and I've had an opportunity to watch EDA teams for many years. And if you read Michelle's background, you can see that she was key in the Obama administration over at SBA. I actually think we've almost switched people. Josh Barnes, who was at EDA working on disasters, probably during a good portion of the Obama administration, snuck through the White House for a while, is now at SBA, not in the same roles as Michelle or vice versa, but Michelle's taking her SBA knowledge and bringing it to EDA. I've had an opportunity to talk Michelle in the same manner we were all talking to her today via Zoom before. Michelle, thank you for joining us today, and maybe you can share how EDA typically responds in disasters. And I think we all need to, Michelle's not saying this, I am, we need to try to get some money to EDA so they can help respond to Ida versus what we've got planned right now. So Michelle, thank you very much, and I'm going to leave the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thanks so much for the warm welcome. Hello, everyone. It is great to be with you all today. I did want to spend just a couple minutes to share with you what EDA does with disasters. And obviously, we know the impact of Hurricane Ida has impacted communities quite significantly. And so we are working hard to make sure that we can provide support to those, particularly who have been impacted by that hurricane. So first off, I want to acknowledge the enormous human and economic toll that we know hurricanes have taken in Louisiana over the past decade. We know how much Hurricane Ida in particular has further compounded that toll on your communities. And we really do want to make sure that EDA can be helpful to you and your communities as you look to rebuild. EDA has a long history of successfully supporting disaster recovery and resilience efforts. EDA's role in disaster recovery is focused on facilitating the timely and effective delivery of federal economic development assistance to support long-term community economic recovery planning, as well as project implementation, redevelopment, and resilience. We are uniquely positioned to coordinate federal support for regional disaster recovery efforts in partnership with our extensive network of economic development districts, or EDDs, as well as our university centers and other stakeholders in a designated impact area. So as I mentioned, we know that Hurricane Ida has really further compacted the impacts of past hurricanes in the area and the economic toll that COVID-19 has also taken in Louisiana. So EDA is positioned to provide resources for several stages of disaster recovery. At the early stage of post-disaster recovery, EDA's disaster recovery grants can help eligible organizations create economic recovery and resiliency plans, sometimes with the assistance of EDA-funded disaster recovery coordinators. And obviously that is something that we're hoping that will be done for Ida as well. As recovery efforts progress, EDA funds can be used to finance construction of new infrastructure or infrastructure repair, or even enhancements to diversify economies and strengthen resilience to future disasters. Examples include business incubators, technology parks, research facilities, access roads, storm drainage, water treatment facilities, all of these different projects we hope will really help prevent business disruptions and retain and create jobs in the impacted region for resilience infrastructure. Economic resilience really depends on the ability of businesses and communities to adapt to changing conditions in order to withstand and quickly recover from disruptive events. And so EDA funding can help communities develop a more robust, diversified, and resilient economy through planning, technical assistance, and core capacity building investments that help businesses as well as local, state, and tribal governments prepare for and bounce back from disasters. So as communities throughout Louisiana are rebuilding and diversifying their economies due to the effects of the pandemic, EDA has also received the $3 billion in the American Rescue Plan funding to support that recovery. So if you haven't taken a look at that, certainly encourage you to take a look at the 6 different programs that we have under the American Rescue Plan program. You can find more information on all 6 of those programs at eda.gov/ARPA. That stands for American Rescue Plan Act. There is a wide diversity of different programs really trying to meet regions where they are and obviously really helping not only communities rebuild from the pandemic, but also from disasters like hurricanes. Much of this funding could be used to support projects like hurricane-related recovery projects. So we do note that we want to encourage folks. We have 2 programs that have distinct deadlines. The Build Back Better Regional Challenge, which has its first phase 1 deadline of October 19th, and then our Good Jobs Challenge, which has one deadline of January 26th. The rest of the programs have rolling deadlines, but we really do strongly encourage applicants to submit projects before March 2022, because we do need to obligate all funds as mandated by Congress by September 2022. So with that, again, we really want to help make sure that we can support you and your communities as you look to rebuild, and certainly want to keep an open dialogue on how we can best support that. So thank you again for having me here today. I will pass it back to you, Jeff, and your team.
My fingers are not that quick. I think I'm here to thank you very much, Michelle, and to turn it over to Frankie to move this along. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I saw the Assistant Secretary earlier this week, and she and I were talking about things like appropriations and EDA reauthorization. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll echo that. Thank you very much, Michelle. We appreciate your remarks. And I have the pleasure of introducing yet another wonderful speaker to our panel, and that's Mickey Valente, and she's president of Valente Strategic Advisors. It's an economic development consulting firm that works with communities that are going through recovery from major economic disruptions or taking proactive steps to build community resilience. Mickey has worked with communities of all sizes across the US and Canada, including California, Florida, working on the Sandy effort, as Patrick mentioned, and the US Virgin Islands. So Mickey, if you would, please, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Frankie and Jeff, and really happy to be part of this discussion today. I'm really just going to give an overview of some major points that I've seen in working with different communities, and I'm assuming that most of you on this call are probably focused on economic development or workforce development or some business development area, and that's kind of the position I'm speaking from, so I wanted to kind of set the stage there. I do have a PowerPoint that if Todd, if you can assist with that, I'd appreciate it. Great, thank you. This is titled Transitioning to Recovery because you all are about at the 1 month mark or so. You're very much still litigation response, I assume, in many areas, and not yet thinking or being able to deal with probably the longer term impacts of what you may be facing in your areas. However, I think it's kind of a misleading title because everything you do should be related to recovery. So all the work you do daily in workforce and economic development is setting the stage for laying the foundation for a stronger recovery. So if you're working on infrastructure projects or you're working on workforce assistance training, that all can lay a better bed for what's going to be able to happen and how quickly recovery can happen in your community if you have the right things in place and the right partnerships already formed. So I don't think Patrick showed it today, but FEMA often will show a diagram that shows a continuum of recovery. Traditionally, emergency management used to talk about phases of recovery, which implied there was preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. But it implies that there's a day or a time that one begins and the other ends, which we know is just not the case. So now FEMA talks about it being a continuum and that these different phases, if you will, overlap and have effects on one another. Preparedness and the response activities affect recovery. Patrick mentioned a few of those. One of the main ones being, for those of you in economic development, probably is public assistance. It's a large FEMA program, and it deals with the infrastructure pieces and the public access pieces that you all have to deal with when you're talking about project development. So if you have done the right planning with your water system, for instance, and you know where the weaknesses may be, you also can understand quickly when a team comes in and says this was the impact from the storm or the earthquake or whatever the event may have been. You have a better handle on what that means to the business community, to the community at large, and kind of what resources might be needed to continue developing your infrastructure project and take into account the destruction that was done because of the event. You also can lay the groundwork with immediate resources, building the foundation for recovery. So I don't know if any of you work in workforce, but obviously there's many support roles they play throughout the year, training workforce and identifying where the weaknesses are and looking at the underemployed and the unemployed. But when an event happens, they are some of the first on the ground working alongside FEMA and other state and federal agencies to look at how can we get immediate assistance to those employees. Those are programs you need to know, even if you're not in the workforce world, because you need to understand as they're doing that, they're also collecting information and assessing what the damage has been and what the economic recovery efforts might need to be to restore the workforce. Next slide, please. So you need to you're at the stage now, but you always have to be doing this in recovery, which is assessing the situation, the impact, documenting, and that's a challenge for many communities because when you're in the throes of recovery, sitting down or assigning someone to just document the process is very difficult to do. So it's hard to come up with a system on how you're going to document, but it will pay off tremendously if you do document well during the process, because there will be after action reports and other longer term resources that will come to the table that will ask you how you actually documented the impact in the event and what was done to address those impacts. And it helps you anticipate, documenting and assessing the situation helps you anticipate what the longer term impacts might be. So if you know that a certain road was out of commission because of the disaster, you know where that road leads, you know how it impacts the local business community, how it impacts the residents, and you can make better plans on how as you prioritize what projects need to be done, where that road should fit in that prioritization. And you can tell the story, if you will, of your community and what actually happened to your community much better if you are assessing and anticipating. Some of the response agencies that can help you with some of the documentation and the assessment of the damage would be SBA. Patrick mentioned that. The SBA, I know many of you are familiar with the SBA programs. They're traditional assistance programs to small business and to innovation. But the SBA has another division, if you will, that is disaster loan programs that not only do the loans or to give the loans for disasters for businesses, but also for residents. So SBA, as they're doing their work in the community and they come in early on in the process with FEMA, they are actually assessing and documenting the impacts on businesses and on residents. So if you can get any avenue to receive some of that information and understand better what they're seeing, not only are they telling you how many businesses say were impacted based on the application for their loan programs, but they can also tell you which ones were not maybe not eligible for their programs or found other resources after they had applied. And that tells you a little bit about how your community is recovering and where the real weaknesses might be in terms of the business community. You also have to think about your organization and your technical assistance capacity. And this is a piece that will always be an issue in any event I've ever seen, because most communities don't think about this, and organizations like EDOs and workforce don't think about this until the time comes and they say, okay, you've had a disaster now and you need to address that, but you also need to keep your pipeline going. You also need to do the work that you do every day. And if you don't have the right people on board or you can't get access to them, this could be a real challenge. For instance, grant writers and grant managers are always in high demand after disaster. So if you haven't identified some organizations, whether it be at universities or your local colleges or some other maybe foundations that are in your area that can assist with this process, you really kind of behind the eight ball in terms of trying to get your capacity built up in order to even apply for, much less manage assistance that you might get. Technical assistance, there may be those that you need technical assistance on, perhaps some mitigation, environmental issues that are going to impact the business community or certain industry sectors. And you may not normally deal with EPA or some of these other agencies on a regular basis, but you need to understand the technical assistance that some of these agencies and organizations provide before the event happens, so you know where you can tap those resources. And there are resources at the federal, state, local, and private level. I'm often surprised that local communities don't understand some of their state programs, and they don't really understand how they tie into the state assistance that may be available to them. Some tend to understand the federal programs better. There's also local resources and private resources, foundations. We know that for major events like Hurricane Harvey in Houston area, that the private sector played a huge role in coming in and assisting not only residents, but businesses. So evaluating and understanding that before you get into it, where you might go for what, is key to a quicker and more effective recovery. Next slide, please. So I call this a reality check because sometimes I've seen, and it's well-meaning, and organizations, whether they be chambers or economic development organizations, will step up quickly, and they usually do. But they often try to do too much or get into areas that they don't have the expertise or, frankly, the capacity to address. So if you've done that reality check before an event happens, you know where you need the help, where your gaps are. So for instance, if you may be dealing with economic development, but you don't work with the small business or the tourism industry on a daily basis, you're going to need some experts who know how to work with them and have those relationships already built. So building that team and knowing who you need on it before the event is crucial to getting a recovery started and to doing it well. Capital, we often hear about the financial capital that's needed, the access to capital for small businesses that exist in many of our communities on a daily basis, much less after a disaster. But we need to talk about the political capital too, and understand what position your local leaders are put in making tough decisions after an event, and helping them make those decisions and helping them make them wisely, and having those discussions ahead of time about if this should happen, what should we do or how should we respond. You don't wait till you're in the throes of disaster recovery to have those conversations. And then the social capital that you need, just the buy-in from your community. So there's a lot of talk about inclusiveness now, but the reason there's so much talk about it is because often you'll see in these communities, and it's not just after disasters, but it's particularly pertinent after disasters, that there seems to be segments of, whether it be the business community or residents, whatever, left out of the conversation. Often when you hear talk about inclusivity, they'll talk about community organizations, churches, and others who usually aren't if a partner, not a vibrant partner with economic development and workforce. But when the time comes and there's the disaster, you need all the partners you can get. So thinking about that ahead of time and building some of those relationships can be very valuable to your work. So be honest with yourself, what you can and can't do. I've seen many chambers of commerce try to take on pieces that they just weren't equipped to do, well-meaning, but there's roles that they're great at and they should be applying their efforts to. But if there's no team built, any organization steps up is going to just see the gaps and try to fill them, whether they're the best ones to fill the gap or not. Next slide, please. Engaging. So the traditional and non-traditional partners, if you're in economic development or workforce development, you know who some of your traditional partners are: the academic institutions, the chambers of commerce, the industry organizations. But once again, going back to if you don't deal with the ag industry that's in your area, when's the last time you talked to the county extension agent? Or if you don't normally deal with the arts and cultural community, do you know who those organizations are? Are they part of your team? Do you understand? We talk about tourism as this one thing. Tourism is a very broad area and it involves a lot of players. So if you don't understand the way your tourism industry, particularly for those communities, and we see many of them over the last few years who are heavily dependent on tourism, in economic development doesn't work with them on a daily basis, then your community will suffer in terms of its recovery, and not understanding how to address those tourism-related issues or small business-related issues, as we've seen with COVID. I've heard more than one economic development partner say that now they do understand better the small business community, they understand better the retail sector of their community, and because of COVID-19, they have now engaged more with partners they've never had engaged with in the past. And they're going to keep those relationships building going forward. So that's a positive result, actually, of what's happened with the pandemic. And then you need to consider the existing strategies and potential priorities. So if you've done a comprehensive economic development strategy, a local economic development strategy, a workforce strategy, all of those pieces should have been an opportunity for you to bring the community together and talk about some priorities for economic development and workforce development. And if you've done that right, that's the good starting place for any recovery efforts. So when Patrick mentions, infrastructure damage, for instance, some of that should have been noted in terms of what infrastructure is in the community, where you need to expand the infrastructure, how you can service the infrastructure expansion. So when you come to a time after an event, you need to look at those plans and say, how much of this is still relevant? How much of it can we affect now? Is this going to give us our priority list of projects when we hear from EDA and USDA and others about what they can do to assist? Do we have that priority projects ready to go? And one of the potentials of a disaster and the positive potentials that you could take a project you were planning on anyway, perhaps to expand the local economy and prioritize it and accelerate the development of it. So if you were planning to expand your airport, and now you have the opportunity because funding's coming in and you could still make a legitimate case and maybe a better case because of the disaster why you need to expand that airport, then you have that project ready to go. So considering what you have laid down on paper or have bought in for the community already, then you can more likely get those projects off the ground quicker. Next slide, please. And build back stronger. Patrick mentioned this, and it's a catchphrase: build back better, build back stronger. But it's true. You don't want to build back necessarily just what was there. You want to build it back better and more conducive to a growing economy. So some of the areas you're going to see from federal agencies and from others and how they support your efforts, they're going to be looking for how you're going to integrate mitigation, for instance. In California, I'm working with them now with the wildfires, and they're already getting questions around how can we mitigate our economic projects? How can we get funding for that, technical assistance for that? As we build back, we want to make sure, or build new projects, we want to make sure we're considering the mitigation efforts that we need to apply here. And it's an opportunity to leverage the resources. So for instance, again, in California right now, the workforce development boards are looking at applying a disaster workforce, dislocated workforce grant that they get from the U.S. Department of Labor. They're struggling because in the wildfires, so many people have evacuated that what they can pay for, temporary jobs to do debris cleanup, for instance, the workers aren't there, and the workers who are there don't have the training or the experience to do that type of work because it's debris cleanup is, and especially in a wildfire situation, it's hazardous waste cleanup is basically what it is. So we've started some conversations between the workforce boards and the California Office of Emergency Services to talk about how we can train workers who could come in and do that work, And they want to emphasize the training because they don't have the local workers, so they may need to bring in workers to do that. So thinking about those things ahead of time, how can you satisfy two different areas of need, or what you can think about far in advance, the likely scenarios, and think about how you would address those scenarios. We also know that climate change and sea level rise, and I live in Florida, so that's a often talked about challenge, sea level rise. Those are items that federal agencies and others are going to be looking for in your applications. They're going to be looking for, have you considered these as vulnerabilities? Have you included that in your list of assets and vulnerabilities? And that's something I want to mention too, is that I hear a lot about asset mapping, and especially in the world of economic development. It makes sense. You want to know where your strengths are. But I don't hear a lot about vulnerability mapping and vulnerability assessment. Knowing where your vulnerabilities are, for instance, where your supply chain vulnerabilities might be, and some that you might not expect. And I mentioned agriculture because in North Carolina, there was a good example of that. Some of the poultry processing plants and poultry farms that were there with the flooding of the late 2000, I believe it was 14 or 15. They found out that the rows that were damaged, they were not able to get the poultry to the processing plants in time. And that matters because there's a certain size of hen that you need to have to process it. So something as simple as that, like why is this road so important? Well, you've got to get the product to the manufacturer, basically. So thinking about those kinds of vulnerabilities within your community and understanding where they exist is going to be very important to laying the groundwork for a stronger recovery. So I'm happy to take any questions now, Frankie, or wait till the whole panel gets questions.
I will go ahead and I'll just introduce a couple slides that to frame IEDC's work in this area, and then we will have a panel discussion. Mickey, Jeff's with us, and we'll be able to discuss many of the themes that you brought up. I would like to proudly say that under the direction really of Jeff Finkel, IEDC has been a leader in the disaster recovery space, as he mentioned, starting with Hurricane Katrina when IEDC sent volunteers down to that area. And if I could, I have a slide deck that shows some of the resources that IEDC employs in our economic recovery and resilience programs. And I will go ahead and go through these rather quickly so that we can take advantage of the fact that Mickey has so much expertise to lend to us. Next slide. But let me tell you first a little bit about IEDC. For those of you who are with us who may not be aware, we are the world's largest association for economic development professionals, established 95 years ago with 5,000 plus members and a network of over 30,000. We are based in Washington, DC, and our mission is to help people and communities involved in economic development at all levels do their jobs more effectively. Next slide. In terms of our economic recovery programs, many of those come from grants from the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Stick around for the next panel, and you'll see that you are lucky enough to hear from Economic Development Administration folks from your region. We have actually worked and do work in the Philadelphia region in the USVI in Puerto Rico. And we also work for some of the other regional offices, and we're in over a dozen states and territories doing disaster affected recovery and resilience work. A lot of that work takes the form of deploying volunteers and panels to provide technical assistance on a wide range of economic development projects. And we develop courses, workshops, and other resources. So this is done on the ground or virtually as we have pivoted in the last year. Finally, we have an online resource center that we maintain that EDA first initiated and is supporting now, which is restoreyoureconomy.org, which we keep updated with federal, state, and local resources and other materials relevant to current disasters for your reference. Next slide. This shows the breadth of communities that we've worked in. We've had over 300 assignments, several in the Southeast and in the Northeast, including Sandy. Next slide. And these are some of the topics for recovery and resilience projects. We are involved at the front end. We've been on the ground. One of the type of projects that we have been engaged in quite often is business retention and expansion, such as needs assessments in the, I would say, short to medium term recovery. We also do a lot of work for strategic planning, which is more involved in under the umbrella of resilience, you might say. But we are really working across the spectrum, and we extract the needs of communities, and then we find volunteers who are professionals who can provide technical assistance in those areas based on their own expertise. And those volunteers come from our membership for the most part, and they have 10 plus years of experience for the most part. And often they have CFD accreditation. Next slide. So some project examples are, as I mentioned, a survey and needs assessment. I know there was one done after Maria in a town off the Panhandle in Hawaii. We have been working with the county there to build EDO capacity to assist businesses. That would be Economic Development Organization capacity to assist businesses, giving them a series, I think, a 3-day, half-day workshops on all kinds of ways that they can assist businesses with BRE programs, with e-commerce, and with other needs. CNMI, technical assistance for a rural business incubator. That would be the Central Northern Mariana Islands. That's way out there in the Pacific. Puerto Rico, assessing financial tools and revolving loan fund performance. There's a lot of need for gap financing, and we often consult on that. USVI, we were involved in assisting in the preparation of the Tourism Master Plan. Texas, this is again a resilience piece because we're a couple years out of Harvey, but still working there. And we worked on the Complete Communities Initiative, 10 different communities which were under-resourced with their action plans. Next slide. So that is to say there's a range of needs, short, medium, and long term. Today we're talking about 30 days out, not just about 30 days out, but that's about our moment in time. And I would say IDC starts there, and well, we start on day one with Restore Your Economy, and then we start virtually as soon as we can, and we're on the ground as soon as we can, but not to impede FEMA and other emergency efforts. These are just a few fun snaps from our volunteers in CNMI, and there's one on an Opportunity Zone workshop and outside the Houston metropolitan area in the bottom right. Looks like a volunteer flew out to North Carolina, probably Florence relief. Next slide. And the next slide, which seems to be kind of frozen, is indicating that there are these digital type of offerings that have emerged in the last year, which are webinars, and like this one, frankly. That says 1 to 2 hours. Well, this one's more. It's a series of webinars, really, and sessions and workshops with local and regional partners. We are actually, the next one we're hosting is going to be on Monday, co-hosted with the Louisiana Economic Development, the state agency there. Next slide. So these are some of the areas we're working in. As you can see, they cover the range of EDA regional offices. A range. We've also worked in some others, covering, for example, Florida. Next slide. And that's a snapshot of our website, restoreyoureconomy.org, which I would urge you to visit, and which we continue to improve. And it morphs. There's been a lot of focus on COVID in the last year, which is a disaster. It's a disaster affecting all states and territories. For the first time, a federal declared disaster, and also it shifts as need be and is updated as need be. Next slide. We do research and technical assistance. We do have one grant from headquarters, which is on recovery and resilience strategies for pandemics, what we've learned from COVID-19. It's a little bit of a different kind of a disaster. Training right now, I'd like to note that IEDC is partnering with ICMA. We have a planning for economic recovery course, and that's for FEMA actually. And the next one is October 28th from 11:30 to 3:30. So you can certainly find out about that on our restoreyoureconomy.org website. And we do a lot of state and local work as well. Next slide. So that's all for me. Questions indicates questions for the forum. So if you want to bring all of us up, Patrick had to go, but I think that we are fortunate enough that we have Mickey and Jeff with us. And I do have some questions of my own stimulated by the conversation. And I think we've had some in the chat bar for Patrick that were previously answered. So if Mickey and Jeff will join. Okay, Jeff actually left. So it's Mickey and I. We may not go the full length of this session, but we will perhaps chat with Mickey for just a few minutes and then go ahead and take a break before 2:30. But you know, if Mickey's around for 10 minutes, that'd be great. Mickey, I wanted to know kind of in terms of the communities and their responses and their recovery, what you see as the most common mistake that they tend to make in their recovery efforts and how they can overcome that.
I think it's kind of what I referred to when I was speaking. It's that they don't have a team ready to go. They haven't designated a team. They haven't thought about who could do what best and leave that responsibility to that organization. So it leaves organizations scrambling to see how they can help and often duplicating efforts and maybe not filling some gaps that are still there, or trying to do something that's beyond their capacity or their experience. So, but it's natural when there's a disaster, people want to help and they haven't planned ahead of time to have the right people in place to do the right pieces.
It looks like I am. In terms of barriers to business recovery, I'm wondering what are some of the ones you're seeing? I'm wondering, for example, you know, as I think about New York, and you talked about inclusivity and recovery, and a lot of those folks that were in those apartments in Queens, and I'm sure the small businesses were immigrants, right? And sometimes there's even language barriers. So, you know, are those barriers to business recovery? Have we figured out how to address them? And or what are other barriers to business recovery that you've seen?
Well, I think that one in particular is a big issue. It's an issue in California. It's an issue in New York, some states more than others. It also can be an issue for certain industry sectors that tend to, if you have a fishing industry, and a lot of the folks come from different Asian countries, for instance, and we've seen that in Louisiana. I think it's thought about a lot more when you're doing individual assistance. FEMA's done a lot of work around that area to make sure they have the right people in place to assist the different communities. But sometimes we don't tend to think of businesses as communities. We think of them as buildings or operations. They're people too. And I think sometimes we forget that when we're planning on how to assist business, we're forgetting there's people who work there and run those businesses that need to be dealt with in the same way your average resident does. They have residents too. And I think that can be a barrier. Mental health counseling for businesses there's been, you know, a lot of discussion around that and a lot of work done, especially because of COVID, but understanding that there's certain pressures that business owners and operators, employers have that go beyond maybe what you might see if someone's a resident or retired person. It's going to be different. The issues they're dealing with are different. And often I don't think economic development and such is ready to lend those services or know where to get them necessarily.
Yeah, and a lot of the communities that may be on the call, and you know, a lot of communities, as we know from these 100-year, 1,000-year floods, are in areas that have never experienced these kinds of disasters. And frankly, COVID, of course, hit a lot of areas that had never experienced disasters. So how would you recommend that communities incorporate mitigation, preparedness, planning, moving forward into their strategic plans when they may not have done so before?
Well, I mentioned how, you know, local communities often don't understand what their own state partners can do for them or how they can support. I think the states probably need to step up in steady state times when they're not dealing with a disaster and think about how they communicate and educate the locals and bring them in as partners as well. I think sometimes the states are there just as kind of a go-between, say FEMA or other federal agencies, but they're much more than that. They understand their communities. They work with them every day, and they can take a much bigger leadership role, I think, than they sometimes do in terms of how they work with these communities and help them prepare, help them put together a team, understand they need a team, and how those layers interact when there's a disaster.
Patrick talked a little bit about how following Sandy, there had been some improvements, some mitigation, and that had lessened the impacts that New York and New Jersey were victims of. In the case of Ida, I don't know if you can speak to that or that compare the two events, and maybe did we learn something in fact from Sandy that made this tragedy worse or not as bad as it could have been?
Well, I think the people living in those communities that we have on the call to that webinar probably could comment better to that specifically. But I know I was in the Sandy recovery with the economic development team, our economic recovery team, and there was a lot of debate about built barriers and natural barriers and how you need to kind of balance those two when you're working with different areas. I think we've come a long way because I've seen the discussion change. In fact, FEMA just came out with, and I'll send you the link, I think I have it, but FEMA just came out with a kind of a handbook on natural barriers, how to build those, how to incorporate that type of mitigation into your community. And that was something that, took a few years to come out, but I think there's a whole different consciousness about that issue of built environment and natural barriers.
And do you think that everybody is now coming around to the notion that that global warming is a factor behind natural disasters? And because if so, that would potentially influence resilience planning, right? And whether decisions like whether or not to rebuild in a floodplain area. And what's the trend in that area?
Well, I think I might, if I were you, pose that to some of our federal partners who are coming on, because I think a lot of their grant programs and the work they're doing from a technical assistance standpoint has some of that language, usually climate change, not global warming, but they have some of that language integrated in there to talk about how you're addressing those issues is going to affect how they look at your projects or the longevity of your projects and the priority of your project. So I'd be curious, and I don't know if the two agencies we have on are probably the best ones. It'd be good if we had EPA on and HUD and some others to deal with these more specific issues. But I think if you look at any of their new grant programs or guidance, you'll start to see some of that language appearing and that discussion going on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't recall the exact wording, but among the investment priorities for EDA, and I know the first is equity, and then you have workforce and infrastructure. I know there's one related to the environment or there's resilience, but I know there's also one related to the environment. And I just didn't know to what extent that was part of, say, communities and local economic development organizations. Say, for example, in Florida, where I think you know Florida, right, Mickey?
Yeah, and after Hurricane Michael in Florida and the Panhandle, there was a lot of discussion around that because these were very small communities, many of them very rural communities, who really had outdoor activities and tourism as their industry base. And so there was a lot of talk, and the EPA worked closely with a lot of those communities to say, what can we do to not only mitigate, from disaster, potential flooding and such, but also think about how you use that environment in a different way for public trails and recreation areas and such. And I was quite impressed the work that EPA did hand in hand with these local communities. And probably none of those local, chambers of commerce and others who were trying to do this work had ever talked to EPA before. They didn't even realize there was technical assistance was available. So I think a lot of it's just kind of understanding where those resources are and how they might interact with what you do from an economic development standpoint in your community.
I'm looking at a question in the chat box, which says the flooding in Queens in the area not closed to water. Well, it looks like it's not far from the water. So how will you address this issue in the future? So it appears that with Queens, there's an issue about proximity to water. And of course, we heard Patrick talking about stormwater drainage as well being an issue.
Yeah, and that's something that he would know from the public assistance side, because they're usually the first ones who document that
Yeah,
disaster, and then bring in other partners like EPA to assist them in that effort and how they address it.
yeah,
U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, of course, is the coordinator for the infrastructure recovery group. And something Patrick didn't mention, and I didn't as well, is the National Disaster Recovery Framework, which basically sets up 6 different teams, if you will, to look at these issues from their viewpoint. But the idea is that they're supposed to look at cross-sector issues, such as we're talking about, and say, okay, how do we come together to figure out how our programs can be most efficiently used and most effectively used for these communities?
okay, great. So we are, well, we're approaching the end. I am curious though, we are now at, just on Monday will be the 30-day mark, or the 1 month mark from when Hurricane Ida made landfall in Louisiana. So where would you say communities should be, and between that 30-day mark and that 60-day mark? And I know you said that there aren't phases, things are more fluid and on a continuum, but we know where we are now for the communities that are hardest hit, say in the Northeast. What are the biggest challenges and best strategies at this point in time, and say in this 30-day period?
Well, one thing I'll say, Louisiana in particular has done a lot of work since Katrina in terms of building their teams. They have a state, I just mentioned the National Disaster Recovery Framework, they have a state recovery framework that brings those different partners together, the different agencies and private sector organizations. So I'm going to assume that a lot of those communities will be better off because they have some at least state teams in place, and some of the locals have organized themselves well enough to be able to assess. But normally they'd be assessing what is the impact, because anyone who comes in to assist you, particularly with dollars, is going to ask you to verify the impact, to document it. And that's where a lot of communities fall short. They can't document, especially when it comes to the business community. So I think Louisiana will be in a lot better shape than maybe some others who, like you said, have never had this experience, never had to do this before. I think we can learn a lot from what they do. But putting that team in action, that business recovery team, if they have it, or economic recovery team, whatever you want to call it, putting them into action now, because they need to be gathering data, need to be looking at potential challenges down the road.
Yeah.
What does it mean if this certain business sector is not eligible to get loans from SBA? Well, it means that they were probably underserved to start with. I think of the fishing industry in some communities, where they didn't have the verification of income to prove what they need to prove to get a loan. So how are we going to address their challenges? And some of that work has been done in states like Louisiana that have dealt with a lot of challenges, communities that haven't maybe dealing with this for the first time. So one of the things I think we ought to encourage is anytime that IDC or others can identify a like community that has made some progress in these areas, to put them together with those who have not had that experience. So I would encourage anybody who's on the call who is saying, where do I start, to ask for that kind of help. Who can we talk to that's a similar community that has worked through this in the past?
Yeah, and I will put my self in the chat box, my email, but you can talk to any of us regarding resources. And at any given time, if it's a federally declared disaster area, we may be working in your region, you may be eligible for free assistance. Otherwise, we do assistance on request. But
I don't know about you, Frankie, but I've never seen a community that has the experience reluctant to help another.
Right. That's absolutely right. And that's, pay it forward. And that's what a lot of our volunteers are all about, is because they have been through disasters themselves. So they therefore deploy to try to provide assistance to others. It certainly strikes a chord what you're talking about with these businesses that, don't have the necessary paperwork for loans, be it a business license or past taxes or whatever it is that they require. And what do you advise in terms of creative financing that communities can provide to meet the needs of these businesses that don't otherwise meet lending criteria?
Well, a lot of it comes to the private sector. And I know from having worked with US Chamber on this issue, they've been working on it a long time. How do we get the private sector more engaged?
Yeah.
And most major companies want to assist. They get business recovery. They understand why it needs to happen. I think what hasn't happened is a system similar to the Red Cross or United Way, where they can trust that if they put their dollars there, how it's going to be spent, how it's going to be managed, how it's going to be allocated. And I think, I don't know that anybody's come up with a solution for that yet. But that's where community foundations come in, for instance, having them get involved in taking donations and documenting that. But one thing we didn't mention in our presentations today was case management, because if you're going to take that on and you're going to assist businesses, you need to follow through. You need to track what services they got, what services they still need. And that's a big lift.
Well, thank you so much, Mickey. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. I know there's going to be a 5-minute break before the next session. I just want to say that what you have really underscored for us is the need for partnership, for a business recovery team to get activated right away, and for those stakeholders to be identified ahead of time, and really given us a lot of strategies to help communities in terms of their readiness and in terms of getting back on their feet following an event. So I want to thank you so much for your time. And I know you'll be with us in the next couple webinars, where we're going to have one on Monday, which is focused on Louisiana. There will be a little bit different set of guests, by the way. Mickey, in your first panel, we'll have the Secretary of Economic Development for Louisiana, Don Pearson, and we'll have a couple of different guests. And next Wednesday, which is focused towards the Southeast. But thank you so much, Mickey. And for all of those attending, please take a minute to take a break, and then please come back. I will tease you a little bit. I'll let you know who we have coming up. Like I said, the Economic Development Administration, the one that is dedicated towards providing economic recovery funding, is here with us. And we have those that are representatives from the local Philadelphia office. And so that's a rare opportunity to hear from them, and also represented from the Small Business Administration. So we will resume at 2:30. Thank you, everybody, very much.
Hello, everyone. This is Todd Lang here, without video, but just chiming in. But there's an issue that you may see where names are not listed. So if you could rename yourself, you may be able to see that in the box under participants. That will just help with identification for both our panelists and our attendees when they're chatting within the chat box. And feel free to chat with me directly if you have questions on that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad that you have joined us. We are here for the second session of our webinar today, which is focused on recovery and resilience in communities in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. And I think, however, you'll find there's lots of instructive lessons to be learned in the areas of preparedness, mitigation, recovery, and resilience in general. And in this second panel, we have guests with us that will be discussing federal resources for your communities. I am very excited because we have a few representatives from the Philadelphia Regional Office of the EDA. So this is your chance to ask them questions, as well as a representative from the SBA, which will be following them. If you do have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. And what we will do is reserve them for the end when we have a panel discussion. And unless we're running really fast ahead of time, then maybe we'll fit some in between, but go ahead and put them in the chat. And without further ado, I would like to talk a little bit about our guests from the EDA. The Economic Development Administration is the lead federal economic development administration, and its agenda promotes innovation and competitiveness, preparing American regions for growth and success in the worldwide economy. The US EDA's investment policy is designed to establish a foundation for sustainable job growth and the building of durable regional economies throughout the United States. The EDA can provide the funding to capitalize creative funding approaches, such as revolving loan funds or infrastructure that supports economic development. The EDA offers economic adjustment programs to regions experiencing adverse economic changes. Again, following the presentation by those from the EDA that are with us, we'll have a representative from the SBA. But first, please join me in welcoming our first three speakers that represent the EDA Philadelphia Regional Office, which represents 13 states, 2 territories in the District of Columbia. And among those states are New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania, which are some of the ones that were impacted with the most devastating effects from Hurricane Ida. I'm not in the order of names that I have in front of me is Area Director Marguerite Mcginley. We are so pleased to have you with us, Ms. Mcginley. And if you would please proceed with your remarks to us today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay, great. I was having a little difficulty with the system. First of all, joining me this afternoon with my team is Matthew Suchodowski. Matthew is our economic development integrator, as you know. All of you know him, and I'm sure have worked with him in the past years. He is also our EDR for the state of Vermont. And also joining me from my staff is Mr. Christopher Casper. Christopher is our Economic Development Representative for the state of Pennsylvania. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. We appreciate it. And yes, I'm Marguerite Mcginley. I'm the Area Director for the Investment Development Team here for EDA in Philadelphia. As part of this webinar, our work would pertain to New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, our stakeholders in those states. Okay. So just to go over, do you have the PowerPoint presentation, Todd? There you go. There you go. That's us. So good afternoon. And our office, our tiny little office, encompasses 3 regions. It's Region 1, 2, and 3. EDA's mission is to lead the federal economic development agenda by promoting innovation and competitiveness, preparing American regions for growth and success in the worldwide economy, as was just previously stated. The United States EDA investment policy is designed to establish a foundation for sustainable job growth and building of durable regional economies throughout the United States. This foundation builds upon 2 key economic drivers: innovation and regional collaboration. Innovation is key to global competitiveness, new and better jobs, a resilient economy, and the attainment of national economic goals. Regional collaboration is essential for economic recovery because regions are the centers of competition and the new global economy, and those that work together to leverage resources and use their strengths to overcome weaknesses will fare better than those that do not. EDA encourages its partners around the country to develop initiatives that advance new ideas and create approaches to address rapidly evolving economic conditions. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Matthew Suchodolski here. We're going to provide a little bit of an overview here with this slide, which is shows 2 states of economic development. The first of which you see the pyramid, a healthy ecosystem, various types of infrastructure, both social and physical, consistently wrapped around, as you can see with the yellow lines, by people and culture. Part of the reason we're here today is support to IEDC with this presentation focuses upon the second graphic image that you have there, long-term economic recovery. Any type of disaster is depicted by that cluster of red vertical lines. That's an incident. EDA's investments are primarily centered around the third curve that you see emanating from that line, the long-term economic recovery aspects. And then apart from that graphic, you can also think of it as something that is cyclical. Those long-term improvements or advances therefore then feed into disaster preparedness that you see on the left hand of the slide. If we can move to the next slide, please. Honing in a little more direct, we're here today to talk about EDA's available resources, grant programming, relative to long-term economic recovery, specific to those so-called remnants of Hurricane Ida disaster declared counties in each of these 3 states. New York and New Jersey relative to Region 1, and then Pennsylvania relative to Federal Region 3. That assemblage of counties is where EDA is able to review and consider applications for recovery assistance predicated on that disaster declaration. If we may move to the next slide, and our colleague, Mr. Casper, will talk about eligibility and programs.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Awesome.
Yes, we can, Chris.
Great. Who can apply for an EDA grant? Obviously, we want to try to help the widest swath possible, but we are limited to the institutions and people that are authorized to apply. To be an eligible applicant, you must be a state or a city or a political subdivision of a state, a district, some kinds of water authority or a sewage authority. You can be a district organization, an Indian tribe, an institution of higher education, or a nonprofit, either private or public nonprofit, acting in coordination with a political subdivision. And when we say that, it doesn't mean you have to be aligned. It means you have to be aligned with their goals and what they're trying to achieve. So we want the nonprofits to be working toward an overall economic objective, not just doing their own particular project. Next slide, please. Okay, what is the situation where someone is eligible to apply? We do have what's called distress criteria. Now, obviously, we're talking about a specific disaster situation with Ida, but there's a slightly larger picture you need to look at when applying to EDA. Obviously, the situation that happened with Ida will cause or lead to these criteria, but let me go over them individually. First, an unemployment rate in the region over a 24-month period that is at least 1% higher than the national average. We pull our data directly from census to get that, and we use that as a determination. Another metric we look at is per capita income. If the region has a per capita income that is no greater than 80% of the national average, then you become eligible. The third criteria, and this is what is applicable most today, is the special need. One of the most pressing special needs is a natural disaster or some other major disaster or emergency. We have not, I need to be clear at the moment, we have not actually gotten specific funds for Ida yet, although we do anticipate at some point in the not too distant future to have some allocation in that respect. And I'm going to talk in a minute about some of the different or a few of the projects we've helped in the past due to natural disasters. Next slide, please. All right, these are some of EDA's programs that you can apply for. All right, you're an eligible applicant. You meet the eligible distress criteria. Okay, so what is the best program to apply for? We have multiple different programs that you can apply for. We have planning grants to help you if you're not exactly sure of what project you have, or you not sure it's going to work and you kind of want to plan something for your particular area to deal with the resiliency post hurricane or disaster. You can apply for a planning grant. We have our public works program, which is basically designed around construction projects. If you're doing something with bricks and mortar, you would apply under our normal public works. Our economic adjustment, where you see a little star next to it, is kind of our most diverse program. That allows you to do not only some technical assistance type programs, but also a mixture of brick and mortar, little of one, a little of another, majority of one or another, but it's very versatile. And when you have a program coming forward, talk to the EDR for your state. If it's Pennsylvania, it would be me. If it's New Jersey, we would have Edward would help you, and each state is listed on our website with who the EDR representative is, and you can talk to them specifically about your needs. Additionally, under the economic adjustment, we have what's called a revolving loan fund program. We give those loans out to address certain kinds of we give the loans out to an institution that manages them, and then they in turn give those out to help businesses in their particular community based on a set of criteria that they set up the loan fund. Each of our economic development districts have a revolving loan fund, and you can contact them about not only theirs, but other ones in their immediate area. Then we have more specific local funds, our local technical assistance to help with small planning and public and private sectors deal with specific issues in their area. We have university center grants that help universities build their resources and able to help develop new technologies and programs. Next slide, please. Now, we also have our Build to Scale program, which is a nationally run program. We don't run that through our through our Philadelphia office. That is run through our national office. We have our trade adjustment assistance for firms. We have a research and national technical assistance. Again, these are our national programs. They're run through a national competitive process. Everybody puts in, they select whatever the number is for that particular year, and then fund a specific project set. And then we have our economic development integration, which Matt will go into more detail on that because he is part of that particular team. Next slide, please.
All right, thank you for that, Chris. Much appreciated. EDA staff joining you today would certainly be remiss if we did not mention EDA programming under the American Rescue Plan, ARPA. EDA, these funds are specific to the COVID emergency and state-by-state disaster declarations. They are not traditionally climate related relative to geography and water bodies and how they interact, but attendees today are encouraged to take a look at EDA's suite of ARPA programming. That is available at eda.gov, of course, and then the grant application packages, as well as those 6 notices of funding opportunity, are available at the grants.gov website. I am now going to turn it over to Marguerite for some project examples for you. And the next slide, please.
Great, Matthew, thank you. In FY18, we received a NOFA announcement came out for FY18 disaster funds, and that NOFA included every disaster occurring in calendar year 17. For EDA, that meant Hurricanes Irma and Maria, but also some disasters in states, in our states. But Irma and Maria devastated the islands of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And we have finally expended our last dollars this week to assist with the FY18 disaster NOFO. Great experiences, sometimes very difficult to get to where we are today, but we have 2 examples here on this slide. One is for the Puerto Rico Industries for the Blind Corporation. This money provided assistance for advanced robotic apparel manufacturing. It equipped highly automated sewing machines, which resulted in 100 new employees trained and hired from the Western Puerto Rico region. Robotics expanding socioeconomic resiliency through streamlined training further enabled those with manual dexterity limitations, creating opportunities for the disabled. This project has been very successful. Second project mentioned on the slide is Blue Tide. It's a key component of Puerto Rico's comprehensive economic and disaster recovery plan. This was an investment for disaster resiliency for marine research and product development, data and technology collaboratives, ocean economy workforce development, advanced manufacturing, fishing and tourism. So again, kind of different from your regular bricks and mortar project that you may think we participated in, and it is doing very well so far. Next slide, please. Okay, this was a huge one for us. I know for years and years, we've always wanted to assist Roosevelt Roads with some type of redevelopment, and this occurred, disaster money for the local redevelopment authority at Roosevelt Roads. We are in the process of rehabilitating a building, a former Coast Guard building, into a port control building. Adaptive reuse as a publicly owned multi-tenant commercial facility, which houses early stage businesses linked to visitor economy and site improvements for adjoining food truck park with pedestrian friendly streets and sidewalks. I'm sure all of you know this is a former military base at Roosevelt Roads. This one, the next one on our slide is Fundación de Puerto Rico de San Juan through its Calabria Renewable Energy. This project is still in the process of installing 100% renewable energy systems to support businesses within the municipalities. Next slide, please. Okay, and Chris is going to discuss these 2 projects. And remember, Maria and Irma, FY18 Disaster Supplemental did not just assist communities in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. It was also stateside. So Chris Casper, you want to take these 2?
Thank you very much, Marguerite.
Thank you.
Lycoming County in Pennsylvania was one I worked with them diligently on when the storms hit in 2018. Post-storms, the Army Corps of Engineer came into Lycoming County, did assessment of the levees and realized they were in serious distress. And a lot of major corporations and company sit on the backside of that eye wall. Companies like DuPont and Shopvac have major plants on the other side of those walls. And if those levees went, those plants would have all been underwater. So EDA approved a grant to come in to try to help repair this eye wall to prevent the loss of anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 jobs. So this is a really, really important project for the state of Pennsylvania to keep the jobs there. It also allowed these companies to feel secure enough to actually invest and expand those companies, which otherwise they wouldn't have been able to do. Flood insurance, scarcity, and a bunch of other things. So this was a really successful project that's actually ongoing right now. They're doing the repairs as we speak, but a very important investment by EDA. The second one on the slide is from Maine. It's supporting the continuity and public safety for tourism-dependent town. The floodwaters came in. The retaining wall was about to, again, assessed by the Army Corps of Engineer that it needed to be stabilized, it needed to have new drainage put in, and they came to us and asked for money to help improve that, to protect the jobs in this small community. The result of this particular project saved over 300 jobs and assisted over 80 businesses in this area and prevented the downtown from flooding that probably would have happened in future rains if we hadn't come in and invested the money here. So EDA does like to come in. It's all about economic development with us, but these have a greater impact than just the businesses. They really do help the communities in general. I'll be followed by Matt, who's going to talk a little bit more about our priorities at EDA.
Alrighty, thank you, Chris. Much appreciated. And as Marguerite and Chris provided real-world examples of EDA investments predicated on long-term recovery as a result of presidentially declared disaster declarations, hopefully that shows the our audience today, the audience members, that EDA can support a wide range of economic development projects in response to disaster declarations, with a bottom line always being job creation, job retention, and enhancement of private investment. Again, getting back to that steady state, enhancing or improving what we often hear the term the new normal after a disaster. These EDA investments are really have a focus on elevating that level of the new normal and enhancing resiliency as a true and integral part of that new normal. Just a really quick case study here. This is not a disaster recovery project, but please think about it in the context of resiliency. This is a project EDA made a grant to grow New York City in and around 2017. And some of the EDA funding, roughly 2.4 million, is being invested in this facility specifically for cold storage. EDA took a very focused approach with the one element of this very large food distribution facility, and focused on, what would make the greatest business impact relative, again, to jobs and private investment. It was determined that the center of this facility, the cold storage element, would be the most applicable for that. Our colleague Ed Hummel, along with Marguerite, worked very, very hard and diligently to support this application when it came in. The green market in the Bronx, certainly a sub-region that fits EDA's standard eligibility criteria, And, in short, it's a wonderful project. It's going to aid in the creation of 131 jobs, retention of 11, and that's a minimum projection. We're knocking on wood that reality over the course of time will bear greater quantities than that. Another quantity of EDA's metrics, as you can see, is the 4.4 million in estimated private investment directly within the South Bronx. A few months ago, I believe back in March or April, the Bronx Times did a wonderful feature on it. This is being pointed out to you today as we move into a overview of EDA's current investment priorities. Why is EDA making grants under this current administration? It is due to these 7 investment priorities. I happen to be of the opinion that that Bronx project, as well as the other ones that have been exhibited for you today, in one way, shape, or form, fit all of these. We can certainly see that equity is the call of order for the day in this day of age. Recovery and resilience, again, specific to natural disasters. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. We didn't move on to slides. I'm sorry. There's your Bronx case study. Pardon me for not queuing up Todd. Please forgive me. If we can move to the next slide. EDA's investment priorities. So here you have equity, recovery, and resilience. If we can move on to the next one, please. Workforce development. Sure, the labor force is crucial to economic development and the way in which that labor force is cultivated and provided skills, training, the KSAs per se to, compete in this not only locally, regionally, but internationally. Manufacturing, a mainstay of Department of Commerce and EDA functions. If we can move on to the next slide, we will round out the investment priorities. Then Marguerite can conclude technology-based economic development. Certainly the call and order of the day as technology and automated processes are changing the landscape of how businesses do business and how workers achieve that level of take-home pay to keep the family supported. Environmentally sustainable development, I believe Frankie touched upon that as an EDA investment priority with the previous session. And ultimately, again, another mainstay of the U.S. Department of Commerce. So projects that support exports and FDI. FDI meaning foreign direct investment. I will stop there. I will turn it over to our area director, Marguerite Mcginley, for concluding statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. I believe there's a final slide. And while Todd's going through the slides to get us there, I just want to remind everybody that EDA, we're a small agency, but we are asked to perform tasks, and we've all risen to that occasion, whether it be FY18 disaster funding, which EDA in total got $587 million. Philadelphia got $191.269 million. FY19 disaster, EDA got received $587 million. Philadelphia received $50 million out of that. Most importantly, these past 2 years have been crazy for all of us. EDA was entrusted with $1.467 billion in CARES funding. Philadelphia received $259 million of that money. ARPA, again, EDA was called upon to assist our states and our communities. EDA received a total of $2.940 billion. Philadelphia received $554.6219. As Matthew stated, that ARPA money came within 6 different NOFAs, and all those NOFAs are available on EDA's website, as is success stories, contact information. And again, we are here to assist. don't know if we are going to receive Ida disaster declaration or disaster NOFA. However, just remember, because those communities were declared disaster areas, that assist with eligibility for EDA to participate in investments. Now we're going to go to questions and answers. And thank you so much for your time today.
I think we need thank you very much, Marguerite, and we have one more speaker in this panel from the SBA, Kathy Cook. We're quite excited to hear from her. Marguerite, will you be able to stay with us? You and Matt and Chris?
I will not. I believe Matthew and Chris already have some things to finish up for Noah today by the end of the day. But I want to thank you so much.
Understood. Thank you very much.
It wasn't in person.
Thank you very much for your
thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Okay. I think what we'll do then is go ahead with the game plan and listen to the remarks from our next presenter, who we're very happy to have with us, Kathy Cook, with the Small Business Administration. And the Small Business Administration, created in 1953, continues to help small business owners and entrepreneurs pursue the American dream. It's the only cabinet level federal agency fully dedicated to small businesses and provides counseling, capital, and contracting expertise as the nation's only go-to resource and voice for small businesses. Kathy Cook has over 30 years experience with SBA, and in that time has been involved with every major disaster declaration in states east of the Mississippi River. So if my geography is correct, that would include Hurricane Sandy. And of course, she is knowledgeable about our subject today. She's an inductee to the International Women in Emergency Management Hall of Fame and daily informs the public, elected officials, emergency managers, and others about the availability of SBA disasters, loans, and services. So I really look forward to hearing from Kathy and then hearing from our panels together, because I bet there might be some dialogue. And again, those of you in the audience, as you have questions, please put them in the chat box. We'll be addressing them in the Q&A panel after Kathy's remarks. Kathy, please.
Thank you, Frankie, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. You are amazing, and this is an amazing panel. And even though the Small Business Administration has been around since 1953, I would dare say that only 1% of the people know that SBA has a disaster assistance program, and it's been since the inception of the agency. Currently, SBA makes loans to businesses of all sizes, not just small businesses, businesses of all sizes, nonprofit organizations, homeowners and renters. Yes, I said homeowners and renters. Don't let our name Small Business Administration fool you. In times of disaster, a majority of our applicants, in fact, are homeowners and renters. We are actively involved with and in conjunction with FEMA on all of the Hurricane Ida declarations for us, which include North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. Currently, we have the same counties as FEMA declares. FEMA declared for New York, Bronx, Kings, Nassau, Queens, Richmond, Rockland, Suffolk, and Westchester counties for the declaration of Hurricane Ida. But what SBA does is we offer physical loans to repair and replace what was damaged by Hurricane Ida in all of those counties. But in all of those counties, and every single county that touches those counties, regardless of what state it's in, we offer economic injury disaster loans. I call those keep the business in business loan. And what that means is whether or not a business is physically damaged, they can be economically impacted. Let me give you an example. You're a restaurant downtown Manhattan and the floodwaters came And so you have a basement where you store your product. Electricity went off. Water came even to the first level. So it destroyed your tables, your banquettes, your food, your dishes, all of those things, maybe even broke the window to the restaurant. Then we know you're physically damaged. But what you don't know is that because of that physical damage, you're also economically impacted. You need money to pay the rent, to pay for real estate taxes and insurance if you own the place, for payroll taxes, for inventory and equipment, machinery, all of those types of things. So SBA offers both of those types of loans, and the 8 counties that FEMA declared, and you can borrow up to $2 million for that. And if you are in the contiguous counties to those 8 counties, then SBA would offer you up to $2 million just for your economic injury losses to keep the business in business, pay the normal operating expenses and fixed debt payments as if the disaster had not occurred. Normally, a business can take care of these things themselves, but disasters are unexpected. Currently, we have approved over $14 million in disaster loans in New York and over $12 million in New Jersey. So this is not a small disaster, and we realize that. One thing that SBA does that I want to make sure everybody knows is not only do we provide funds to repair and replace, but we go beyond that. We offer funds for mitigation. Mitigation is seen as protective improvements, something you would do to your property to prevent the same damage from occurring. Let's take that same restaurant that had supplies and equipment in the basement. If they had just elevated everything above 3 feet, then maybe those products, those dishes, those napkins, all of that equipment would not have been damaged. So that's an example of mitigation. They can borrow up to 20% above the loan amount, and that 20% amount is based on our verified losses to the property. SBA's home loans can be offered up to $200,000 to repair and replace the real estate. And for homeowners and renters, we can offer up to $40,000 to repair and replace any personal property, including automobiles. Why does a business forum care about home loans and loans for renters? Every business has an employee, even if it's a sole proprietor. So not only do we have a lot of mom and pop situations, but we have people who have home-based businesses more than ever now because of COVID-19. So they can apply for a business loan and a homeowner loan as well. The interest rates are currently 2.855% for a business, and we also help nonprofit organizations. The interest rate for them is 2%. And for homeowners and renters, it's as low as 1.563. The interest rate is determined at the time of processing. And another piece of good news is that because we're in this COVID environment, the administrator is allowing every disaster loan, the first payment, to be postponed 18 months from the date of the promissory note, not the date of the recovery, not the date that you had the flood, but 18 months from the date on the promissory note, which is one of the loan closing documents you would sign. This allows time for everyone to commence restoring their property and begin to recover economically. That's us in a nutshell, and I think if anybody has any questions, I would be glad to entertain them.
Thank you, Kathy. I think at this time it would be great if we could also hear from Matt and Chris, and perhaps have a few follow-up questions to that plethora of information that you gave us about all the resources of EDA and SBA. There's a question that I want to go to first from the chat box. Stuart Portney, I hope he's still on the line. He was here with us on the first panel and again on the second, and he's asked whether there are potential sources of assistance through EDA and perhaps through SBA, because I think you mentioned philanthropic institutions have some availability and eligibility. Whether there are potential sources of assistance through EDA for houses of worship impacted by Ida. Can they receive financial assistance, and if so, through which programs? And what is the process of applying and receiving funds?
SBA is able to incorporate houses of worship for physical damage. Houses of worship are generally nonprofits, so they can apply for their physical damage up to $2 million. However, we are precluded from offering houses of worship, religious organizations, economic injury that keep the business in business funds. So until Congress changes that, then currently we're just able to offer the physical disaster loans. However, you may have been around during the previous conversations with FEMA. FEMA now has a component in their public assistance program where if a church provides critical services such as housing, such as food kitchens, then FEMA may be able to offer a grant for those religious organizations that had damage. So between FEMA and SBA, there's a host of opportunities.
For EDA, similar first response as most institutions of worship are nonprofits, but EDA's focus is different. The philanthropic aspects wouldn't be what would attract us to a project. It would be the economic development aspects. They would have to show the issues of distress would be easy given what happened, but what are they doing to address EDA's specific priorities? How are they creating jobs, the workforce development at the back end of the project? So that would determine which source of funds they were looking at, how they were going about achieving that, and to address it, what are they doing? Are they rehabilitating a property that they're going to house out, rent out to some type of company? Are they actually doing some sort of self-employment? Are they doing a specific job training that produces certificates for people to get employed in a skill that's needed in that particular area? So it would be very, very project specific, whether or not we could help them or not.
Okay, great. All right, well, I'll go ahead and I'll ask a general question. I guess first I'll ask about communities, and then I'll ask about businesses, which of course are very important units within communities and units of and engines of economic development. So what's the most common mistake communities are making in their economic recovery efforts, and how can you overcome this? And maybe I'll ask that about communities and then also about businesses.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start. There's a kind of a fine line with EDA between community development and economic development. So when we look and we're talking about communities, we don't do community development. Although they are a building block and we understand they're a foundational piece of a thriving economy, when that line is crossed, when it's focused on the community blight or beautification to attract businesses or some of the necessary parking for businesses and to build those things in, we tend to shy away from that. We are strictly the economic development piece of that. So when coming to EDA, have that economic development focus. We concentrate on job creation, workforce development for needed skills in a particular community. So have that focus in mind. How are you creating jobs? How are you saving jobs? How are you building the economic strength of that particular community for the long haul? How are you being resilient and helping the people? How are you addressing the distress needs that make you qualify, i.e. the unemployment or the underemployment with the per capita income? So projects that don't address those specific things tend to not do very well with EDA.
As far as SBA goes, our loans are only for businesses of all sizes, nonprofits, homeowners, and renters. We don't offer assistance to the communities. Any municipality damage to the infrastructure is handled by FEMA under their public assistance. But what we do is actually, and a lot of times people are frustrated. All of a sudden they see a lot of SBA and FEMA and Red Cross and all these people kind of infiltrate the disaster area. But when we come in, we not only come in to provide disaster relief and disaster assistance, whether it's loans or grants, but we are also trying to stimulate the economy just with our own purchasing power. We're eating at whatever restaurants in the disaster community are open. We're buying goods at whatever stores are there. I happen to be a national shopaholic, so I'm always shopping free, regardless of whether they're on sale or not. So, I'm always having to pay for the extra luggage coming home. But, we try to stimulate the economy that way, just by our mere presence and trying to inject dollars into the local community. And that way we can help spur, and even to some degree, FEMA and other agencies may hire locally. So that can be of assistance to the community in helping in recovery. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I will say one thing that comes to mind, because Chris mentioned that that EDA doesn't do community development. So HUD would with the CDBG program, the Community Development Block Grant, and in the event of a presidentially declared disaster recovery, the CDBG DR funding. We did have somebody from HUD scheduled to come who couldn't at the last minute, who might have filled that hole, but in any case, for those of you who are looking for that resource, go look at HUD at the CDBG resource site. I want to ask a question about capacity, because you have great programs, but all communities and businesses are not created equal when it comes to capacity and their ability to access them. So how do you help communities that need help, perhaps applying for grants? Mickey Valente in the last panel mentioned, for example, that grant writers are very much in demand. And how do you help community businesses, for that matter, who have a hard time applying for loans because they may not have the paperwork or the credit or the tax returns or the even business license?
Frankie, if I may take a try at that before our colleagues chime in. That question that you have directly relates to the previous question, right? It's a disaster situation. People, individuals, families, households, businesses, all members of a community at large are working really hard to recover. In many ways, there is no level of mistakes being made. There are barriers, there's impediments, there's gut-wrenching challenges, but that relates to your second question as well, because it's a matter of partnerships. And there's a bit of, what we have seen in recovery experience are forms of mutual aid. And I'm not saying mutual aid as a program. I'm saying mutual aid as a means of recovery. When Chris provided the example of the two projects, the one in Lycoming, PA, Pennsylvania, and the other in a small business resort community of Maine, we intentionally placed those host recipients, in one case a county, in the other case a municipality. We intentionally placed those logos on that slide and paired them with their regional planning organizations. Without those partnerships, without recognition of partners, that's where we often see many mistakes relative to application development occur. For example, I happen to be working and providing some consultation to a museum these days that's looking to enhance their facilities relative to the new conditions of COVID, and also fold in a workforce development element to its expanded desires to expand their facilities. That workforce development element needs to be done in conjunction with the State Department of Labor and any particular workforce investment board. Without demonstrating, a level of co-working in that program development, applications with EDA would really not fare well per se. So again, that wider range of partners and their appropriate roles in any kind of project that's being developed for EDA consideration, I would emphasize to any stakeholder that's looking to apply for EDA funds, consider that wide reach of partners and see who can contribute what to the greater effort. And that what to the greater effort is not always dollars. It relates to capacity. No one individual or organization can, go through recovery alone. It's not a solo act. We've heard it over the past 18 months. We're all in this together. I hope that's helpful for the stakeholders relative to EDA and how it helps develop and review applications for funding consideration.
And I know a lot of people probably have their ears open with ARPA right now. So, but thank you.
Yeah, and if I may, for our colleague from SBA, Ms. Cook, and in respect to her longstanding experience with SBA, here's a good game plan or level of connection, that connective tissue. In the steady state economy, EDA's grants to regional revolving loan fund operators, more often than not, those loan funds to businesses are often conducted in conjunction with SBA-backed loans. And I'll give a bit of a roster here. In New York City, EDA supports True Fund Financial, the Greater Jamaica Development Corporation, Queens and Rockaway, and the New York Economic Development Council, as well as the Long Island Development Corporation as revolving loan fund operators. So each of those local and regional organizations have a tie to EDA, and they have a fund onto which to make loans to businesses in need that will enhance, again, job creation, private investment. In New Jersey, there's the Jersey City Economic Development Corporation, and of course, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. Sometimes we call it, in the shop, I call it the other EDA. Both of those organizations operate EDA-supported revolving loan funds. In Pennsylvania, relative to the disaster declared areas, there's the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation and the Bucks County Industrial Development Authority. Both of those organizations are EDA revolving loan fund operators. If you were to step into any one of those organizations, they speak the SBA language, they speak the EDA language, they make good connections.
Thank you, Matt. Kathy, did you want to add anything about capacity of businesses? Okay. Does anybody else no longer see Kathy?
I think she was dropped, or she dropped off accidentally.
Okay, well, we'll see if she rejoins us. Since EDA is on the line, maybe I'll ask, I just heard a lot of interesting stuff about what's happening up in New York in terms of the revolving loan funds and resources up in there in that region that really needs it. So maybe I'll just ask things more generally. For example, about that investment priority of the environmentally sustainable development and whether or not you think EDA investments will look a lot different through that, with that lens being. I mean, will you be looking at things that projects that are predicated upon some effects of climate change, you know, and therefore support efforts that assume that that's going to be part of the picture?
Frankie, one thing, Kathy has returned in relation to that question on recovery and resilience.
Yeah.
That one is has been long-standing with EDA. It is a key driver. We see it quite often. Coastal, it's the name of the game with coastal communities. You know, for example, if we go shoot up to the north a little bit, our colleague Deborah Bevan helped work with the city of Chelsea, Massachusetts. And I know we're getting a little bit out of the region there, but think about the geography there. Coastal, highly urbanized, dense population. Much of the population are new Americans or perhaps undocumented individuals. So, you know, it's a rich mosaic is what I'm trying to say. Ms. Bevan worked with the city of Chelsea and its food distribution ecosystem, heavy duty transportation needs, right? How do you maneuver the 18-wheelers of large volume properly within that urban environment? And how do you protect and sustain those coastal businesses properly? She worked very well with that community. Our colleagues at FEMA, Region 1 in particular, happened to find that project and its cross theme of not only supporting a business environment, but also enhancing coastal recovery and resilience to be somewhat of a model. So, you know, we could go through our portfolio and there would be many. I'm going to turn it back to Kathy now.
Fingers crossed. One of the things I was about to say, besides SBA being at disaster centers after a presidential disaster or an SBA only disaster occurs, is we partner with small business development centers. They're located in local colleges and universities. We work with chambers. We work with you, the EDA, to help spread the word, but also to provide counselors that can help the business complete the paperwork. Some businesses are very good at selling, but they're not very good at accounting. And so when we ask for things such as a profit and loss or balance sheet or schedule of liabilities, they're just dumbfounded. So for, you know, absolutely no cost, we have all these partners that can help them complete the paperwork and upload the information to our electronic application. And so in going through that real quick, I just want to reiterate something. SBA disaster program is not just activated when FEMA declares a presidential declaration. Those are the most well-known situations. But currently, and you may know, SBA has an Office of Capital Access, and they are administering disaster loans for COVID-19. We had the Paycheck or Payroll Protection Program, whichever way you want to call it. We've had several different products that have hopefully made the difference in a business's ability to survive, and worked hand in hand with them through our toll-free number. We have operators that can answer questions. SBA can make its own declaration if there's only 25 home center businesses that are 40% or more physically impacted. So we've been to New York quite a few times for apartment fires. And also it seems to be more of the urban places in Philadelphia and places in Jersey as well. And then even the BP oil spill was something you don't think about as a disaster, but it economically devastated the coast. Who wants to stay in a hotel when the sand is full of black balls of petroleum? So SBA gets involved in a lot of different disasters, including farm-related businesses. When the Secretary of Agriculture declares a disaster for farmers, then SBA declares the same area. So you may be a store that sells feed and seed and fertilizer, and you're devastated because of the farmer's plight. So in all these different industries and these domains, there's usually a disaster declaration in which some small business can apply for economic injury. If they have physical damage, then they can apply under the FEMA presidential declaration or the SBA only declaration. Those are the only two that offer economic injury as well as money for physical disaster damages. And as you said, it is crucial for us all to partner together because people look to us to find ways to recover. Relief or what have you. And this form is just and help them to expand and this one is just because together we can help all the communities and all the businesses of the community. So we help the businesses, we're helping the employees. When we help the employees, we help the entire community. So I appreciate the opportunity to answer that question. Thank you.
You're still on mute, Frankie.
Thank you. You've talked about a lot of different resources, and I'm just kind of curious, which one or ones do you think are the most underutilized or are the secrets that, are not the secrets that you would convey to communities or to businesses that are not being fully taken advantage of?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking both of you. Yeah. What are the tools you think are most underutilized?
I think the entire disaster assistance program is underutilized. Again, people in this day and time are resistant to loans, but they don't understand where is the money going to come from? If they don't have savings, if they don't have insurance, where is the money coming from? And again, in today's environment, currently, for every disaster declaration, we are able to postpone the first payment due on a loan 17 months. So it won't be until the 18th month that the first payment is due. That's a year and a half to allow the business to recover and make their repairs and replacements and gain their customers back. So I think it is crucial for elected officials and for other state and local and federal agencies to help those that are being available. The more that we know, the more referrals we can make, the better we can help the business recover and help the community overall. I just think we're kind of like almost like the Maytag repairman. I mean, we've been in operation since 1953, but did you know prior to this webinar that SBA makes disaster loans? And if you knew it, you would think just making loans to businesses, not to homeowners and renters and nonprofits. It's just the best kept secret ever. But in fact, millions and millions and actually billions now because of COVID dollars have gone through our agency over its 67-year history. So, it is something that, of course, it's just like insurance. You want Allstate and State Farm and Farmers to be there when you need them, and you don't check on it too much when you don't. but we're having more and more disasters. We're having more and more catastrophes. We're involving more and more communities and states all at the same time. And so we all need to kind of get disaster savvy and learn what resources and support the resources that are there. Thank you.
On the EDA side, it's not really, it should not be a secret. Being preparedness, being involved, whether it's at the individual level, the organizational level, and that, organizational level includes individual businesses, business chambers, associations, groups of businesses, municipalities, counties, being prepared, showing up, getting involved in the planning process, whether it's municipal planning or regional economic development planning. Be that voice, get that seat at the table relative to enhancing preparedness and resiliency. Government folks, the bureaucrats can't do it all themselves, and only when there are disasters. We as public servants, we're trained to listen, and we're trained to help elevate individuals that want that seat at the table, wherever that table may be. It may be with the municipal planning board, it may be with the local economic development committee, it may be with the regional economic planning body. Show up, get that voice heard relative to what's needed for disaster preparedness and enhancing resiliency.
Frankie, mute.
Yeah, mute again, Frankie.
Sorry, folks. I'm really trying to make things run smoothly and not do background noise. If businesses or organizations come to you with requests that your agency doesn't handle, that's not quite in your lane, what are some community or local institutions that you tend to refer them to? So maybe it's a business that you can't quite serve because of qualifications, or community that you can't quite serve.
On the EDA side, that is exactly where EDA's line of business known as economic development integration can come in. And, from my desk, whether that is a small voice coming in over the phone seeking assistance from the federal government, or a large voice coming in, I'm going to work hard to make sure they get some level of service. It may not be the ideal thing for them at that particular moment, but follow through and delivery of that service and making the connection points, whether it's with other federal agencies, state level agencies, or down to the regional and local level. It's just a matter of good service and follow through, and making sure that any particular requester receives some level of information that they can act upon.
And I would say I'm very lucky because we are just one of the U.S. Small Business Administration's programs. So a lot of times people will come to me because they want to start a business, or they want to expand their business, or they need financing. So generally I'm referring them to other programs within our agency. Also, in many states, they have a business action center, or a kind of a 211 for business, where you can find all these different resources, whether you're trying to apply for a business license or you want to find out if you need one. We make referrals that way as well. Also, we tell people how to get a disaster declaration so that our low interest disaster loans are available, which usually involves working with the county emergency management. So we've learned those networks, and we've learned and FEMA's public assistance, what businesses, the nonprofits that provide critical services can get. So, and we certainly use EDA to help people as well. So anything I know, I guarantee you're going to know, because I'm going to help you however much I can, whether it's in my program or another program, because I think as public servants, that's part of my job. And not that I can know the whole Rolodex of everything, but you know, when you come to us, I think we have an implied responsibility to help you as much as we can. And so I do try to make those connections as often as I can so that my Rolodex expands and I can direct them to the right services.
I have one question. I thought it might be the last question because I know we're short of panelists and I don't need to keep everyone for all day, and this has been so rich. But if you would, you know, we're talking to an audience which includes some of the areas in the Northeast that may be experiencing a disaster like this for the first time, a natural disaster. So moving beyond even this moment of recovery, and knowing that 100-year floods and 1,000-year floods are going to happen again, what advice do you have for communities or businesses that may be adjusting strategic planning efforts, maybe business continuity efforts, to have more of a focus on recovery and resilience?
One of the things that we want to encourage in our program is to take advantage of building back stronger and more resilient. I think that's a big point. So when you have destruction, then you build back stronger and consider raising your property above the floodplain, relocating utilities, building a safe room. If you especially were in a tornado, all of those types of things are very critical. And then a lot of times people get flooded that never were flooded before, but a lot of that is due to the infrastructure. You know, when we continue to build and there's nowhere for the water to go except on the black asphalt of the road, where usually it could go across the field, we have to evaluate our building plans. And I also think that businesses should get involved in that, as well as reviewing insurance. I didn't know before I started with SBA 30-something years ago that a flood insurance policy was separate from my homeowner's policy. I didn't know that you had to have a separate hurricane policy and that covered wind, and then a separate flood policy that covered the flooding, and that the two insurances may fight against each other with it, deciding what the damage was done caused by flood or caused by wind. We found out during the pandemic that business interruption insurance doesn't cover pandemics. So all of this knowledge that I have from working in disaster assistance really should not be news to the average business owner. I think that insurance companies need to do a more complete job of explaining all of the different types of coverages. For instance, in the Northeast, a lot of their flooding is caused, unfortunately, by sewer backup. And there's a special rider for that. So there's all these different things, and insurance is usually what we would say the first line of recovery, but it's also an expense to a business. And finding out what kind of insurance, the cost, and determining that before you locate your business in a certain area. All these kinds of things. I mean, I think we almost need to have a little handbook. You know, if you want to start a business, think about this, think about that kind of thing. But as an overall community, people need to get with their building authority and with the planning department and get involved and understand what's going on and what the risks are in the area so that they can mitigate whatever loss might come, because it doesn't seem, especially this year, that things are going to ease up. You know, we've got 3 tropical depressions out there now. So we need to arm ourselves with, you know, instead of worrying about so much of advertising online and different social media things, we need to take care of some of the basics as well. And I'll turn it back to you, Matthew.
Sure thing. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. I'm pretty sure she's covered most of it there.
Okay, great. I see a comment in the chat box about wouldn't it be helpful to have a technology solution that'll, like a dashboard that allow EDOs, CDCs to log into to be able to see what resources are needed and where and what organizations assisting. I think I can plug the SBA as having something like this that was just developed, Kathy. I think IDC may have been a little bit involved in it. Is it the Recovery Hub? Is that what it is? Or you know, a list of data, tools, and resources for businesses to find, and state by state recovery resources.
In the regular program, we have a tool where you can find the different types of programs, financing programs, and if you are, you know, women-based business or minority-based business or veterans business, we have all the different types of locations where you can find help, and you put in your zip code and you can find those resources. So that should be a great time savings in trying to find where you can get help.
Yeah, so there's probably other resources that other organizations have, but I think the point is taken that we want to have a consolidated list of, you know, that's a go-to list of the most utilized ones. And certainly local EDOs try to maintain their own, and that's important, but sometimes you can't cover the universe. All right. We do have restoreyourEconomy.org, and that's IDC's resource. We try to catalog what we can. And I know the SBA has one. I don't know because we worked on it. I don't know the exact URL, but at this time, I would just like to extend a big thank you to our guests, to Chris and Matt and Kathy, for providing such insight for our audience and giving us a broad view as well as specific tools to help with the recovery in the short term from Ida. And I know EDA looks towards the long term as well, and towards resiliency, which we all need to work towards. That's the goal. So thank you very much for your time. There will be another session, which is coming up, and we are going to be featuring speakers that took part in Hurricane Sandy. Rob Walsh, who is the commissioner of the New York City Department of Small Business Services and led that for 12 years, and led the agency's business recovery initiatives following Hurricane Sandy. So he will be in the next panel, which will start at 4 o'clock. And we'll also have a speaker, Gretchen Haverluck, who is an economic development consultant with Wilmington, Vermont. And she was, and I see Matt nodding, so he knows her. She was involved in economic recovery after Hurricane Irene. So look forward to those of you who can stay to attend or want to take a break to attend and come back and join us at 4. Thank you very much again to our panelists. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Hi, Rob. How are you?
How's that? I'm unmuted now. How are you doing?
I'm pretty well. I'm
glad
Frankie.
you
I'll
did
be,
this. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
great.
yeah,
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, we're so happy to have you.
Yeah.
And it'll be you and Gretchen.
Hi, Gretchen.
Yeah, I think she's there.
Hi.
Yeah,
I
I know you're
am.
probably going to rename
And-
yourself, right? Because it says Todd Lang, but
Todd Lang's not a bad name to have. I got to work with Todd Lang for years. I'll take that.
So I don't have the ability to do that. I
okay.
was just looking for it. I
Wow.
can't do that. I don't know why it's not under view options. That's usually,
If you just click on the name itself, just click right there in that box.
yeah, it does nothing. Where it
Gretchen,
says you're viewing Todd Lang's screen.
Yeah. Gretchen, it's Todd here from audio only. I can do it for you.
Okay,
Hey,
thank
Todd
you.
Lang, how are you?
Good to see you, Rob. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good seeing you. I can't see you, but I hear the voice. I recognize that voice.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on, and we'll start soon. Thank you.
How's it gone so far today? Well,
It's gone well. We have a few speakers who couldn't appear at the last minute. That's allowed for a really nice exchange at the end of each panel. That is the case in this panel where Tracy McDaniel was going to talk. She was, of course, with the state of New Jersey during Sandy. So it'll be the panel will be the two of you after your presentations, and we'll do a Q&A. And, we'll just keep talking while it's interesting. But we're just so happy to have you both here because you're so relevant for the Northeast.
Thank you.
Gretchen, did I hear Vermont?
Yes, it's Vermont. It's near Mount Snow.
Oh, you're near Mount Snow. Okay, I got it. I was just up
Yeah,
in Burlington.
Southern Vermont. Oh, were you? Yeah, that's that's like 3.5 hours from us. What took you to Burlington?
We had a family wedding up there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we had a family wedding. It was real nice. Downtown, I hadn't been there in about 10 years, and a lot hadn't changed, which I was happy about. The main street, and some had, but it was just terrific. And I know the Mount Snow area, fairly well.
Mm-hmm.
Been skiing up there like everybody else.
Right.
Are you
Our
from that
favorite
area?
Activity.
Are you from that area?
I am. I'm originally from Wilmington. And I live a little south of Wilmington now. It's a little town called Jacksonville.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, I'm ready to get started when everybody is. It looks like I see our panelists with us. This is our last section of the day on our briefing on recovery from Hurricane Ida, focused towards the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast regions. And today we will be focusing in this particular section on community recovery and resilience case studies, which happen to be from this region. We'll be hearing from speakers talking about experience with disasters, including Hurricane Sandy, which was the deadliest storm since Hurricane Ida in 2012, Hurricane Sandy in 2012, which brought devastation to the Northeast. And that speaker will be Rob Walsh with Manhattan College. And Rob was a special advisor to the president for strategic partnerships at Manhattan College. He has over 30 years experience in economic development, public service, and education. Rob was appointed by Mayor Michael Bloomberg as commissioner of the New York City Department of Small Business Services, where he led the agency for 12 years. And it was during that time that Rob led the agency's business recovery initiatives following Hurricane Sandy, overseeing efforts to disperse more than $20 million for businesses in impacted areas. Following hearing from Rob, we'll be hearing from Gretchen Haverluck, a consultant in Wilmington, Vermont. She was a key resource for economic recovery after Hurricane Irene, specifically working with multiple businesses that have been deeply damaged and shuttered, and helping them work through short, mid, and long-term recovery strategies, and also the recruitment of new businesses. So I'd like to go ahead and start off right away with Rob and let our attendees know that if you have questions at any time, please put them in the chat box. I think since we have just two speakers and there will be a nice interplay among them, that what we'll do is we will collect those questions and we'll wait till after Rob speaks and after Gretchen speaks, and then the two of them, and we can all talk as a panel. So Rob, would you like to kick us off?
Wonderful. Thank you very much. You know, what you did is you and Todd made me go back to a whole bunch of notes that I had in a box that's been down there for, it's hard to believe, 9 years, right? October 29th, 2012. I won't forget it. We were all bracing for the storm, Hurricane Sandy, which struck New York City with an unparalleled force. It left the city devastated, floods, we had fires, destruction, and more than 2 million New Yorkers without power. Excuse me. Immediately after the storm, we worked to quickly assess the extent of the damage to business and commercial corridors throughout the 5 boroughs. Now, this is not a surprise, and I guess it's, you know, it bodes well what we're talking about with the IEDC, is when we reached out, when we were gathering information and data and combing through the neighborhoods, it wasn't surprised that those commercial corridors that had established organizations, whether they were business improvement districts or local development corporations, were able to recover a lot more quickly. We could rely on them, we could lean on them, we could get information that we were getting from the SBA and our city agencies out to these established organizations, and in many cases, they were off and running. Our focus and my focus began on looking at those corridors that did not have established organizations, community-based organizations, and I quickly looked at the Rockaways. The Rockaways, Beach 116th Street in particular, which had dozens of small mom and pop shops. They were flooded out. There was extensive damage from the winds. And early on, we knew we had a lot of work to do in terms of, you know, just getting out there and seeing what we could do to get people, you know, up and running. So, you know, I think one of the key things is, you know, lessons learned that I've seen, and I've seen this now with other storms that we've been hit, and I think it's important for everybody to hear, is assembling a grant program, no matter what it is, you know, getting money out to small businesses so they could end up having some funds for repair and replacing equipment to get back on their feet. And, you know, some of it was for plywood to, you know, to put up on the windows. Some of it was to, you know, get the place, you know, cleaned up again. But those early days, as I look back at them and I look back at notes again, I was on the phone to a lot of corporations, a lot of foundations, the Mayor's Advance Fund, to cobble together resources that we could then get out the table. Now, and why do I say this? Because what we have seen in the past is whether it's state money or federal money, you know, you're waiting a while, and sometimes, as we saw with the PPP regulations and rules, it takes time. It takes time to get that, game plan together. It takes time for them to, have a blueprint of what's happening. And quite frankly, we didn't have time. So we had to be nimble. We had to get resources in the hands of these merchants. And what I recall is that we capped it at $5,000, and we went around and people, made assessment. What do you need? I need a cleanup crew. I need, and we were quick to get that out. Now, the SBA was also helpful. I commented that it took them a little bit of time, and it did, but they were also very helpful when we needed help. We got tremendous help. Then Karen Mills, who was the administrator, came to New York, opened up satellite offices, assisted us in every way with loans. At this point, many people were looking for grants, quite frankly, not loans to get up and running. It was also important for us. I was running a government agency, is doing everything we could to help those small businesses navigate government, those inspections, the permits to get up and running again, assisting with insurance claims, whatever we could end up doing. Now, I mentioned Beach 116th Street. 116th Street was, and still is, one of the most important commercial corridors in the Rockaways. When Sandy hit, it did not have a community-based organization. It did not have a merchants association. It was struggling even before the storm. The street had seen a good deal of disinvestment with empty lots, empty buildings, and the storm, quite frankly, brought a problem to greater attention and a need for revitalization. And this is where we ended up focusing our attention, is what are we going to do? And the key thing was looking at this in a long-term way. Looking at it is, let us build a organization. Let's empower a group of people to come together, empower them to look at the long game. And with resources, a sense of urgency, we were able to get this group together, and we got help. And one of the groups that was, quite frankly, magical for us was a group called JGSC, headed up by a gentleman by the name of Joe Getz. He might be on the line today. And Joe, commented, and this is something I would constantly hear from Mike Bloomberg when he was made mayor. You don't make decisions without data, in a data-driven, approach. What do the numbers say? And Joe lifted the hearts of a lot of these merchants and property owners by saying, look, the Rockaways, there is a lot of opportunities here. There is a lot of opportunities to attract, and there's money here. We're bleeding it to other neighborhoods because we don't have the coffee shops, because we don't have the restaurants, because we don't have these places. And if we could capture that, and if we could rebuild based on this retail corridor that was, quite frankly, tired, we can make something happen. So with Joe's data and help, we were able to initiate a storefront improvement program. We sunk about $1 million into it. I have seen other storefront improvement programs in my time in nonprofit organizations and government, and sometimes they take too long to get going. So I put staff on them to execute day to day and make sure that permits and whatever we needed to do to facilitate getting it up and running went smoothly. That relationship between contractors, business owners, the city, to make sure that happened. And lo and behold, we got about 30 participants. We gave $20,000 grants out to each of the storefronts. We capped it at 20,000. We had a city marketing campaign. As commissioner, I got on the phone with TV and radio and print media to highlight and feature those local businesses that were reopening again, those New Yorkers that, you know, were pulling themselves together again. And we featured a lot of these mom and pop and local businesses and long-term businesses that were coming in. And then the other thing we did, and I think this was important, and I'll wrap up on this and open up. The other thing that we did was we began to promote this. We had this Merchants Association that was excited about the fact that we were putting resources in and a great deal of attention. But we had a retail recruitment program that Joe Getz helped us with, where we had a Saturday and Sunday morning, and we opened up all of the retail gates up along this corridor that led to the beach. And we made it clear, and we got the word out, you know, to New York about this opportunity to rebuild, and people could come to the corridor and they could look at a lot of different options. And quite frankly, it was very successful. We had bankers out there ready to help on leases. We had nonprofit organizations helping. We had the storefront improvement program. We had a number of things that made it an attractive offer to come in. Fast forward, if you look at Beach 116th Street today, they have an active organization. The storefronts have been improved. A lot of those vacancies have gone. We've seen investment of new housing that has taken place. And it took Hurricane Sandy to bring a lot of these folks together to make something happen special. I'll stop now and get into some of the more details as we go along, but thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, Rob, and we'll look forward to hearing more of those details.
Good.
I bet that they will dovetail in some ways with what we hear from our next speaker, and that is Gretchen Haverlook. And looking forward again to hearing from her and the recovery efforts and assistance to businesses and the community that she led while she was in Vermont. So Gretchen, the floor is yours when you are ready. I will stand by. If you're not, there you are, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Frankie. And Rob, great presentation, thank you. And I have a lot of like duplicate kind of stuff to go. But I do want to say that my bandwidth is really low, and I hope you can hear me. And Todd, were you able to do my, I had a PowerPoint. Can I share that?
One second. Yep, we're just pulling it up.
Oh, you are? Okay. So while Todd is bringing that up, I just want to say that I'm going to highlight the town of Wilmington, Vermont. I did work in Windham County, and I also worked in Lower Windsor County, working with a small business administration as well, right after Tropical Storm Irene hit our area. So is Todd, are you able to do that, or can everybody see the screen and I just can't? There we go. Okay, thank you. So this is the town of Wilmington. This is the intersection of Route 100 and Route 9. Wilmington has a population of about 2,000 people. So we're talking about a super small community. This was one of the hardest hit in Vermont. So 57 buildings in our historic district were completely flooded. 46 of them were flooded. Todd, can you advance? And actually, this is looking Route 9 going east. And there was 2 buildings on this road that 2 buildings were lost in the floodwaters. The next slide. So I'm going to go over a lot of resources that we were able to access. And so the first thing that happened was 2 emergency business assistance coordinators were hired to go business to business and this included the town of Dover as well. This was funded through the town of Dover. They have something called the 1% local option tax. This is a tax that is passed on to the consumer, an additional percent on food, prepared food, I should say, lodging, and retail, excluding clothing. And it's collected through the state, through the regular retail sales tax and room and meals. And then they turn around and send it back to the community minus 30% for their fee. And this is used for economic and community development. And so I was hired as one of these emergency business assistant coordinators. We created immediately business list, and we got assistance from the Chamber of Commerce in helping us do that. I also had a short list of businesses as well. So, and then we started compiling the state and local business resources, and some were not applicable to certain businesses and others were. So we were just handing those off, saying, here's a 1-page grant, apply. And we were the first boots on the ground meeting with people. We actually met with people in muck boots, literally mucking out their storefronts and restaurants. The greatest thing that happened, and this is so community led, in Wilmington, our grand list, which is all of the properties that are listed in the town, are 70 or 68% of those properties are second homeowners. So they are a huge base of our community. And they stood up what they called the Wilmington Fund Vermont. They raised over $500,000 for businesses in the downtown. Friends of the Valley did that also, and that was more expanded, not just for Wilmington, but it was for Dover and Wilmington, and they helped businesses as well recover. The local Rotary Club stood up a grant. They allotted, I think it was about $50,000, and it was a 1-page application, and people applied and they got emergency relief money right away. And then individuals just kind of did a GoFundMe's. Some people that used to live here were living out in Seattle, and they created, $5,000 to help businesses as well. So those were the immediate things. 3, FEMA came about 2 months later. We got a crew that had all retired, and they were pulled out of retirement to come to Wilmington, and Dover actually as well. And all of these things were a little late to the game. And then we also implemented in Wilmington the 1% local option tax like Dover had. We also developed some other town resources, like a tax stabilization program. So this is a staggered tax. So if your property value is $100,000 and you are improving it and you're making it a value of $500,000, you pay tax on that 100,000 for a 10-year period, and it gradually goes up. It's a great program to incentivize people to rehab their buildings. We also set up a revolving loan program. We took $100,000 and we put it into this fund, and businesses could apply for up to $20,000. And it's flexible terms, low interest rate. And this is another great program that was very successful. And actually, we stood this program up again for a separate program. The pandemic for business was very successful. Actually, those loans all got turned into grants, which was really cool. We also did a facade improvement program, and I have some photos here that I'll show you in the next few slides about how businesses could access how to make their properties look better. We also had a professional come in from out of state, and she's a business consultant, and she did one-on-one business counseling, and this was really helpful for people really digging into their finances and marketing, and what do we need to do next, and website development. So these were really good things. We also partnered with Dover, and we put together a digital marketing campaign. So now we want people to come back. So we did a digital marketing campaign structured in Maryland, New York City, New Jersey, Boston, and those areas to come back. And that's been very successful. We have continued to run that program over 2 years. And these, of course, are all funded through that 1% local option tax. State resources, and I'm pretty sure every state has the Community Development Block Grant Program. This is one that you can access for your town to do, studies on, can we, make a new firehouse, or can we, do something, digitization of our town records. We were able to do that. So this is a great program. They also stood up a business program grant as well. I think most states tax credit programs, and many of our buildings were able to access those funds as well. Organizational resources that we pulled in. We have a regional planning commission in Brattleboro, and they were extremely helpful to our recovery, as well as the regional development organization, both of those. Historic preservation, they came in and they helped, evaluate every building. They were super helpful in our redevelopment. And then many community foundations. We have multiple, like the Vermont Arts Council, all of those kind of things were really helpful to our businesses, and they were able to access funds from there. So Todd, next slide. So we're also able to access some funding through the state. Net and Muldrow and Associates did 5 towns in the state of Vermont that were pretty devastated by the flood. They came in and they really did a deep dive into like streetscape, how to make, buildings look better. You really should weed your sidewalks, kind of things like that. Dug into our history, and they were really helpful, and they created a wonderful report, a strategy board, which I suggest, and I should have done a slide on that, but, short-term, real immediate goals, short-term, and then long-term goals. And we have been using that all along. So that's been really helpful for us. Next slide. So if any of you have been to Wilmington, Vermont, you probably have eaten at Bob's restaurant. This was the devastation that they had. I mean, they were completely closed for over 2 years in rebuilding. In order to get historic tax credits, they had to keep the structure of the building. And you can see this here being moved so that they can put a more concrete foundation underneath it for strengthening for future flooding. They also did state of the art. They have a basement that, I mean, this renovation cost over $1 million. You know, like how many eggs can you really sell? They're doing it. But it was also another crowdfunding piece that really helped. You can move to the next slide. The Historic Preservation of Vermont was really helpful in collecting donations, and Wilmington Fund Vermont was also really helpful. This was in the New York Times, you know, that this little town wouldn't let their diner go. And and this is our governor here in the background, and a DOTS employee serving chili up when they announced that they were going to rebuild. Next slide. This is how it looks today. We did adopt this like slogan, kind of like a little marketing campaign. Wilmington, where amazing happens. And we had these banners all over town. So, and this is DOTS, how it looks today. Next slide. So here is one out of the facade improvement programs. We did allow for signage. So one on the upper left corner here, the Viking Motel sign, that's what it looked like. And this is the transformation of the sign from the use of the funds. Next slide. Here's a complete redo. So again, in the upper left is the before, and the bottom right is how it looks today. And it came out really nice. And these facades were, they were up to $5,000. And it was mandatory to put 25% of the project into it. Of course, this project was a little bit more, a lot more money into it, but it really did help them really want to do it. So next slide. So new banners, 1% local option tax. I think this is a way to celebrate your community and draw attention to it as people are driving by through on Route 9 from okay.
Oh,
Sorry about that. Living in the woods in Vermont is a little challenging right now. Next slide. And here we did a block party. This is South Main Street. It's not on a state highway as Route 9 and 100 are. This is a town road. And we closed it down, and we've actually been doing these regularly in the summer. This was shortly after the flood. We get a wrecker to come in, and we put a band on the wrecker, and then people set up, food booths to, activities for kids on the library lawn. As you can see, a lot of chalk here, blueberry pie eating contest, and this is a really good way to really pull the community together and really, bring hope back to the community that we can do this. Next slide. And my takeaway, recovery happens slowly. When I first started this work, I was like, we'll be back up and running in a year, maybe a year and a half. And here we are 10 years after, we still have vacant buildings. And, I just have to say, don't get discouraged. Just keep at it. Keep, picking up the phone, making those calls, trying to access funds for your communities and businesses. The other key piece was the instinct to rebuild. Like, a lot of these businesses immediately started mucking out and then rebuilding. And I think the key piece here is FEMA has buyouts that businesses could do. And there is one business that probably should have done that because they spent way too much on their building for really what it is. So my advice is really wait, assess the value, and this is what we did with dots. And, lots of times it was like, it's not going to happen because it's too much money. And then people really love dots, and that's why it came back. It wasn't because they got lots of funding from grants and, the historic tax credits. And then make that decision. I think that it's really important to the assessment part of it. FEMA, a lot of the businesses went to register with the SBA because that's what they were told to do. And some of them went and came back and said, all the SBA is doing is offering loans. Don't bother to go. It's really important for them to go because this is how FEMA assesses the damage that was done in your community and how much money that you're going to get. So like 50% of our businesses didn't go because they were like, I'm not taking on a loan for this. And so that it was really crucial and we had to advocate to FEMA and show them from the business assistance coordinators, exactly really what the damage was, because we kept a spreadsheet on all of that. And they did take that. It's really good to have each business go and, really assess their damage, even if they're not going to take that SBA loan. The grassroots fundraising is just, I can't tell you, that is the thing that really brought us back and made us all work together. As a community, you can really do it. And preparing for next time, make sure, and I can offer this if anybody wants to contact me, they can, and I can get you a copy of our disaster recovery guide for businesses. And this was done through the state of Vermont, through the SBA. So that's a really good guide for a business to have, like, in a disaster, like, oh no, what do I do now? And they can open it up and look at it. So, and go step by step. And then encourage businesses to get flood insurance. Many of our businesses do have flood insurance, and it was very costly for them. DOTS did have flood insurance, and that was another helpful thing, that they were able to live on the flood insurance money for a year and a half, almost 2 years, before they rebuilt. And they also, it wasn't a whole lot of money, but it was money that they were able to collect. So flood insurance is a key piece. And that's all I have.
Well, that was a lot, Gretchen. That was just fantastic. No, it was fantastic. I love that slide with the list of the amazing compilation of resources you tapped into. And certainly it complements Rob in terms of how you were one-to-one with the businesses. You know, your rebuilding strategies were short-term as well as playing the long game. I have a couple questions and then maybe we'll wrap up since it's the end of the day, but I do want to get maybe 2 questions in. I'd like to ask first, which is, what's the most common misstep you would say communities make in their economic recovery efforts? And turn that around. What are strategies, you know, to overcome that?
I think one of the missteps that can you hear me? Am I on mute? No, I'm okay, right? I would say one of the missteps is people expecting resources to get to them quickly in terms of grants and loans. And, you know, unfortunately, things take time. I mean, Hurricane Sandy, it was a disaster in terms of a bill being passed in Washington for the big money to come to cities and to communities. It was months and months and months. And so, you know, localities had to act quickly. You know, Gretchen talked about, you know, the work that takes place in a smaller place than New York City. We had to hustle. You know, if we did not hustle, we were going to lose many of these small businesses. There was no question about it. What was the second part of that?
So what would you say are best practices or strategies to help prevent those missteps?
I think one best practice, I mean, you know, from our, you know, and I'm talking from a government standpoint, is being proactive. You know, I talked about our storefront improvement program of, you know, to expedite it, do everything you possibly can to cut down the time for approvals. You know, show the local small businesses, show those mom and pop shops that it could be done and done quickly. You know, they have some skin in the game, but you know, if there are delays, and you can't, you know, we took you know, quite a amount of time thinking about, you know, ways we can make it easier to navigate government, and I have to tell you, this ended up helping us long-term in terms of putting together groups within New York. It's a big place, right? Of expediting permits, regulations, rules, where government can actually be proactive in helping communities.
That's great. Let me just follow up because maybe I didn't ask the question right. So for those small communities out there, Rob, I think that that maybe have not gone through something like Sandy,
Yeah.
you know, I guess what would be your advice in helping them rebuild strategically for preparedness for the next time?
I would start with a strong organization. You know, and building the capacity of that organization, and an organization that is going to go beyond, you know, the marketing of the area and the networking of the area, that is looking at a long-term, you know, picture of what it is, you know, whether it's a small town or, you know, the small stuff, you know, storefront improvement projects, fill in vacancies. You know, asking questions about, you know, that store down the block has been empty for a long time. What could we do as a community to help that property owner understand that that is a void and that is a vacuum in our neighborhood? This is something that, you know, we got help from. I mentioned, you know, the group from the outside, Joe Getz, who came in and had done this with a number of different main streets. You know, think about that, being proactive, reaching out to the property owner and then telling the property owner of what the market is like, what's the numbers, what is needed along your corridor that is missing in the neighborhood and the community. That makes all the difference in the world. And I've seen that in New York, you know, where where economic development leaders, heads of business improvement districts will go to another neighborhood and reach out to an entrepreneur and said, you know, your business would do really well on my corridor too. That's pretty creative.
That's great. And then Gretchen, I'll go to you. I mean, what's the misstep that you maybe seen communities make most often, and therefore the advice that you would give to those communities that are going through recovery, say now and maybe haven't, moving forward?
I think that the key piece is that a lot of the government, the municipality, the city, go, okay, well, let's wait and see what the government is going to do first. What kind of federal funding are we going to get? What kind of state funding are we going to get? And then we will, you know, put in our share. That is the biggest mistake ever. It's got to start from what we have for emergency funds that we can stand up and get to these businesses ASAP. And, you know, that was the biggest thing I think that really changed for our outcome as Wilmington, as Dover, because if we didn't have those business assistance people, I mean, we have an aging business community. They're really aging out, and they were getting ready to sell their properties. And it's difficult if they didn't have the guidance, because a lot of them don't have computer skills, you know, any of those kind of things. And so that was really, really important. And for me, you know, I got personal, and I should not have. I used to come home crying about situations that, you know, businesses don't have a nest egg, especially small businesses. They have a really hard time socking that money away, and they really need to do that. That is the most important piece, is having that little nest egg, whether it's a month of, you know, what your normal, you know, your monthly expenses are, you know, like socking that away, making sure that you have those funds available during an emergency. So.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gretchen. You and Rob are really making some great points, and I see a comment I want to share if those of you are not seeing it in the chat box, from Naomi Friedman. Sometimes the property owner is long distance or out of the area, and I think that's the case, Gretchen, in the community you described, right? Where there's a lot of second homes, and or they are making more money declaring business loss by keeping it vacant. Do either of you want to comment on that?
I think it's true. I mean, to the point I made, you know, look, you know, some people are going to declare a business loss, and you know, the flip side of that is some people don't realize the value of their property and what the market says. You know, they don't get a sense of what has taken place along that corridor and what the needs are and what that storefront could attract if it was back on the market. And they may not know about, you know, if they are away in that long distance, they may not know that there's a group ready to give them a, you know, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 storefront improvement program, and that there's someone, you know, ready to help. So, you know, you got to be proactive on this, and even reaching out to, you know, these folks and make that effort of trying to get it back online.
Yeah, we do have 2 of our buildings in Wilmington that are owned by out-of-state people. And, you know, like, I've got to say, the other piece of it is permitting. And, you know, sometimes, you know, they like, you know, being in a historic district and going by the guidelines that need to happen in that. And so we're getting punished right now on one of those buildings. It's boarded up. And we don't have a blight ordinance. We need to have one. And so those are all things that we are still working on. And talking one-on-one to these people, like I do contact them every few months and go, are we ready to do a project? And let me get you some tax credits. And it's just, and let me find you, study it. And, we talk and, nothing happens. So that is a really difficult piece.
And I would also add to that, lessons learned from Beach 116th Street, that just that one example in New York City is small business owners sometimes, individually get down, they don't see hope. They don't see that it's going to get better. The better day was, a decade ago, 20 years ago, when people used to come to the district. The challenge for all of us that are in this business is bringing people together to develop a consensus, bringing people together to develop a vision, bringing people together that says, my business is part of a bigger piece that is going to attract more people to the area. That's when it gets fun.
Well, would you say that there are a few tangible things that you might identify that were outcomes from your relief and recovery efforts that positioned you to be more resilient through COVID and potentially even Ida? Rob, I don't know if you can speak to how New York is faring now.
Well, I have to say I was very disappointed in this administration on Ida of not getting a grant program up and running quickly and getting resources out the door. That was a misstep. You got to get that. There's too many mom and pop shops that are going from hand to mouth. And, not doing that was a mistake. I think the other key thing, and I think the positive piece was we're all thinking in advance now, because it's happening a lot more about preparation in advance in terms of storm preparation and what it takes on storm preparation. And making sure you have your documents. I can't tell you how many people had lost important insurance documents and others because of the storm. They were gone. Now we seem to be a little bit more prepared in terms of, these are the steps that you need to take. And we're not kidding. This may really be bad. We've seen it too many times now.
Thank you. Gretchen, what about you?
Yeah, and for Wilmington, it was, we were able, everything shut down, I think it was March 18th. We wrote checks through the Revolving Loan Fund to businesses at the end of March. I mean, we were able to get funds out really quickly for them. And so, and we also put together, calling each individual business. We had the list from Irene. And so let's, so we got the Chamber of Commerce, the Town of Dover Economic Development person, myself, we have a downtown organization, and we split the list up and we started calling and saying, what's your biggest, what are you worried about? What's, how can we help? What do you need? And we had those calls done by the end of March. And then we did it again at the end of April, calling back, do you have something new to, so that was really amazing. And I think that really helped us. I mean, a lot of these businesses, we had a intake of people moving here permanently. And so that was keeping a lot of the restaurants doing to go. That was helpful to them. When the stores were able to reopen, people were walking in stores and buying things. And so a lot of the grants that are out there now, a lot of our businesses in town don't qualify because they had a better year than they did in 2019. So, yeah. So
That's great.
Actually, could I just make one more point, Frankie,
Of
if I
course.
can?
Yeah.
You know, what I have seen large and small, you know, when we talk about economic development organizations, you know, New York City has 77 business improvement districts now. A lot of them shy away from getting in the business of understanding capital access and getting capital into communities. You know, whether it's a creation of a CDFI or just a basic understanding that the traditional banks are not touching, you know, small businesses that make under $2 million in revenue or have credit problems. And having an understanding that there's other resources out there, nonprofit organizations, credit unions and others that can be a resource to help them, whether it's a storm or, you know, a big ticket project or, you know, what we're going through these days, you know, with the pandemic. And I think that that's important in terms of a shift of getting more economic development organizations to understand that piece and that they play a role in helping these, you know, businesses go above and beyond.
Here, Rob. That's exactly it. Key.
Well, you both brought up such great points, you know, for our audience, many of whom are communities that are experiencing the effects of Ida, others of whom are perhaps trying to preparedness and mitigation efforts in advance of such an unfortunate disaster. And I appreciate everything you said about the importance of partnerships and organizations, from BIDs to CDFIs to the philanthropic sector, which Gretchen certainly highlighted. The numerous array of resources, the assistance to businesses, digital marketing, Gretchen, that's really interesting. That certainly foreshadowed where we are. And so much of what you did seem to foreshadow where we are and position you on the path towards recovery and resilience that we all need to be on. So I just want to thank you very much for participating in our forum today. And it was a great way to wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
all the IEDC does. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great weekend. Take